people, we've got to fight. Jean Petro, you see us. Oguo, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, black people, we've got to fight. Zumbi, you see us. Oguo, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, black people, we've got to fight. Yes, Santewa, you see us. Oguo, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, black people, we've got to fight. Bookman, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh,
we have to have the courage to construct our own reality. And that's what Garvey was talking about. Because he said he looked around, he didn't see what he thought should be there, and so what did he do? He didn't get depressed about it. He didn't get defeated about it. He said, I'm gonna build the government that we need to have. Ooh, where do you get that kind of boldness from? So we gotta go all the way back to Garvey, who said he would come again. He said he would be here with us, no matter how long it took. And I'm telling you that the way he comes back is in our work. Not honoring him in words, pomp and all of that stuff, but honoring him through doing what he did. How many of us have the courage to do that? The man took on the world for us and in our name. And then we come to Sodai. And in this presentation of the paradigm, I'm going to make this like what it is we want to reach. So Sodai is translated clear word in Dogana language. And I use it to mean that here we gain understanding. This is sight with understanding. And it is seeing beyond what just we think we see with this physical thing. It's seeing beyond that. And so we gain vision, because that's what vision is. With vision, you've got to be able to use the imagination informed by the African spirit. And Brother Amos, who I work very closely with, was a good friend of mine. He taught me, and he would talk about imagination. Image a nation. Do you see? But that's got to be part of vision. To be a visionary, you got to see beyond this box here. You got to see beyond the ma'afa. You got to see what is it that our people rightfully should have, and that's what Garvey did. Garvey had a vision.
New era, new transition. Greetings, this is Shakara, and it's been an honor serving you as director of gotkushTV. Over the past few years, we've brought you the pilot of the Black Root Economic Show, many seasons of Wordsmith, The Insight, and the ever-popular Decipher. We have covered community events and even hosted a few of our own, including Blacktricity as a part of the official Ghana Beyond the Return roster. We also kept you company throughout lockdown with the Quarantine Convo. After a brief hiatus, we came back with our regular weekly interactive live show, Zivanai, keeping you up to date with current events around the black world, from UK to Senegal to Haiti and beyond. It is our aim to continue to develop as a premier black media institution, and for that reason, we have a special announcement. Introducing Kimbunga Media. Between the 10th of June and the 17th of Mosiah, August, we will be transitioning to a new name and institution, Kimbunga Media. In the beautiful Kiswahili language, Kimbunga means whirlwind.
Look for me in a whirlwind or a storm. Look for me all around you. For with God's grace, I shall come back with countless millions of black men and women who have died in America, those who have died in the West Indies, and those who have died in Africa to aid you in the fight for liberty, freedom, and life.
Our name symbolizes our aim to take the media landscape by storm, developing high quality, impactful, geopolitical and cultural content aimed at empowering African people, bringing knowledge, information, inspiration and analysis from an unapologetically Pan-African, universal African nationalist and African-centered perspective. So, what can you expect? We are gradually developing a full spectrum of flagship shows and presenters, but in the immediate right here now, over the next couple of years, we have two major aims in bringing you our flagship shows. One, the return of Kush Communiversity, bringing you high-level scholarship in all areas of people activity, featuring luminaries from across the black world. And two, the production of the full first season of the new and improved Ujamaa Black Group Economic Show. While we encourage you to develop and support black businesses, this show aims to raise our awareness of the political economy of today's world and popularize new solution paradigms in political economy among African people. Alongside all this, we will continue to bring you Zivanai, Jaleba, the Afrocentric perspective, All Eyes on Africa, Ghana, Democracy Under Fire, the Revolutionary Minds team with that artistic, ancestral energy, and as things grow and develop, there'll be plenty more. We also have plans to host live events and film screenings, so stay tuned for more information on that. So what can you do? Continue to support us by watching, liking, sharing and commenting on our content. Be sure to follow us on all social media, and if you are so moved, join our Patreon community. We'll be sharing flagship shows exclusively with our Patreon community before general release and granting you discounts to events and future screenings. Right now, if you become a Patreon, you will have access to the pilot for the Black Group Economic Show and all installments of last year's Black History Month series, Sankofa, The Future of Black History. At some point, we'll be engaging in community crowdfunding towards the production of the new and improved Ujamaa Black Group Economic Show, complete with offerings and perks for those who choose to invest in us. Look out for the launch, and we thank you in advance for your support. Any questions, feel free to hit us up in the comment section and we'll be sure to address. We look forward to you joining us for this new phase of our development. Stay tuned as we bring you Kimbunga Media.
Tendai Mwadi, be thankful unto the Mother, Father, Creative Life Force of the Universe, Kudzai Mudzimu Mukuru. We give praises unto our great ancestors, Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodi, African power and African liberation for all African people. Greetings and welcome, brothers and sisters, to this special edition, live and in session with our illustrious elder Cecil Gutzmore. He's in the building, and we're going to be bringing him through soon, brothers and sisters. Do stay tuned, do stay tuned, do stay tuned. Our topic today is revolutionary Pan-Afrikanism, the praxis for African liberation now. Is revolutionary Pan-Afrikanism the praxis for African liberation now? And you know, say when the elder says to come through, appear knowledge, information, inspiration, and direct guidance and action are going to go on around your kings and queens. So, you know, do stay tuned. As always, we will be engaging you after Elder Cecil has presented his case. And so you'll be able to interact with our elder live right now, right? Yes, so kings and queens. So do stay tuned for that. Do stay tuned for that. Before I introduce him, let me just reiterate certain things. Let me make you know what I go on for the month of Mosiah. Yes, indeed, brothers and sisters, the month of Mosiah commences next month. The month them called August, and it commences with the Mosiah opening ceremony. The Mosiah opening ceremony, for which I have the honor of being charged with the duty of delivering the keynote address, brothers and sisters. The keynote address on the subject of Kimbunga. Look for me in the whirlwind. And for those who are unaware, the word sound Kimbunga, spoken in the Kiswahili language, means whirlwind and hurricane and storm and all of them things, the kings and queens. And so the message, in line with two centenaries. One is the centenary of the publishing of the words African fundamentalism, brothers and sisters. An article published by Papa Garvey in the year 1924, and somewhere between 1924 and 1925 is when Papa Garvey, in fact, first uttered the words, "Look for me in the whirlwind," brothers and sisters. So we're going to be exploring what that means on a spiritual, on a cultural, and on a geopolitical level. You know, so we're not separate the political from the spiritual, none at all. So do come true for that, brothers and sisters. Do come true for that on Umoja Day, Sunday, the 4th of Mosiah, August, from 12 p.m. at the Chestnuts Community Center, N15 5BN. And also on the 17th of Mosiah, the birthday of the Prophet himself, we are going to take over Brixton. Drums of Mosiah, brothers and sisters. Bring your drum and come. Brixton Square, Windrush Square. We're going to take over Brixton for a few hours and just beat some drum in honor of our ancestor Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and in honor of our ancestors as a whole, brothers and sisters. So we look forward to seeing you down there on the 17th of Mosiah from 5 p.m. Brixton Square, Windrush Square. And without further ado, brothers and sisters, I know I say as good looking and as velvet in tone as I am, only never come to hear me, only come to listen to the wisdom of our elder Cecil Gutzmore. Once again, speaking on the subject, is revolutionary Pan-Africanism the practice for African liberation now? A very timely topic, because as I've been saying to you, last month was in fact 50th anniversary of the 6th Pan-African Congress, which took place in Tanzania. And so I'm going to be asking Elder Cecil about that as well. And no doubt he will speak to you about that also. So do stay tuned, brothers and sisters. But for now, without further ado, let me bring to you the one and only Elder Cecil Gutzmore. Tendai Mwari, greetings, Elder Cecil.
Greetings, my brother. The technology being what it is, I hope you're hearing and seeing me.
We're hearing and seeing you excellently well.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's give thanks. Give thanks for that. It is good to be with you, my young brother. Son of a brilliantly creative, politically father, and a constantly engaged mother. And I met a brother of yours recently, and we exchanged some words in the context of work he was doing around sport. And so it's clear that all the chips of your conjoined parentage haven't fallen far from that conjoined rock.
Absolutely, Elder
I
Cecil.
don't know who hasn't come.
Give me a moment, Elder Cecil. Sorry, just give me a moment now that you've mentioned him to just dig up my little brother Enika, who was, you know, kind of in many ways the driving force, the, you know, lead organizer in some ways behind the Pan-African Sports and Culture Day, which took place last Saturday gone, which is what you're referring to. He did an excellent job. It was very well organized, and in many ways, my little brother is a better organizer than me, and so that's why I'm big him up, you know, and hear him up. You know what I'm saying? Go ahead.
And the extra point is that in addition to being a good organizer, the young brother has a wonderful head, because we were discussing sports issues and he was right on the ball. And
of course,
I promised to go back to him about that.
So
I am honored to be with you because of who you are and because of your family connections.
Likewise,
in addition to that, I am honored to be with you because of the audience, which I dare to hope is growing, is possibly even large. Certainly, I hope it's critically receptive. I hope it's actively politically engaged, and that all who join us are at least open to be persuaded that their fundamental duty to be part of the forces, the African forces that are on the field of revolutionary African Pan-Africanism, the aim of which must be to achieve a unified and totally liberated Africa. Okay, so I very much hope that that's the kind of audience we have, that we're not turning anybody away. Almost anybody can be converted, as all of these religions have found over the centuries and millennia. You have correctly, and let me just repeat, read it. My topic takes the form of a question, and the question is revolutionary Pan-Africanism the praxis for African unification and revolution now? And it's kind of a complicated topic. So if you're going to unpick it a little bit, start with the now. And that now relates to how things are for Africans in the world. They are not good, to put it mildly. If you're even semi-conscious or with half-open eyes, it is impossible not to see what is presently happening in places like the Republic of Congo. And everybody knows the death rate and from the early 20th century, the heritage of mass European murder that is actually still going on there. Now they have local agents, including agents from a nearby country that had an agreement with the United Kingdom, which appears to have just been set aside by certain forces here. So stuff's happening, very disturbing stuff in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Terrible things happening in the Sudan, where the leaders of two military formations with external support, which is complicated and difficult to understand, but it's not who they're supported by that matters, it seems to me. What matters is that neither have even an iota of human concern about the Sudanese people. And what needs to be said by the AU and by the UN is that neither of those military leaders will ever get any recognition from any entity in the international community because of what they are presently doing, and what they're doing presently started some time ago. There are two military factions, as everybody probably knows, and one of them is formally the Sudanese army. But that army is the entity that was killing Sudanese in order to keep itself in office and prevent the emergence of a civilian government, which had been fought for by the Sudanese people. So clearly terrible things are happening there. In Haiti also, and has to be understood as the white world's first neo-colony. And it's the first neo-colony because a revolution was or attempted to be reversed after that revolution impacted in the form of military defeats of the French, the British, the Spaniards, and actually more than one gigantic French army on the ground in Haiti. The White West, the racist White West, the terrorist White West has never forgiven Haiti. And the purpose of their connection with Haiti has been, first of all, to force Haiti, which has happened, to pay compensation to those from whom they liberated themselves. So the slave owners were actually compensated by the Haitian people over a period that ran from 1825 to 1947, during which approaching 30 billion francs, US dollars, and so on, were paid to former slave owners for the loss of their human and real property in Haiti. And since then, the aim of the terrorist white has been not to allow the Haitian people liberation and to continue exploiting the Haitian people and Haitian resources in exactly the way that they did during the period of enslavement. And when I say it's the first neocolony, it actually was the first neocolony because real political processes and military threats had to be used to impose on Haiti order that succeeded the revolution, particularly after 1825. So, and it matters that something approaching chaos, leave aside the fact that the UN brought cholera, leave aside the fact that forces from Brazil, and you have to wonder why, but forces from Brazil acting on behalf of the United States primarily, but in the name of the UN, went into Haiti and murdered probably tens of thousands of Haitians in struggle. And what they were in struggle about was the attempt to gain control of their national territory against external forces and their internal supporters. It is now the case that Kenya has forces in Haiti, allegedly there, and I know that your listeners have probably been taken through the story, so I won't stay long with it, but what the Kenya government has sent forces to Haiti and they are presently there. It matters that they are part of the same military forces that back home are killing primarily young Kenyans over all kinds of issues about taxation and corruption and so on. So these people, the military, are murderers of one neocolony sent to another neocolony with the purpose of killing on behalf of the West and its allies. So what's happening in Haiti, as I say, is not at all pretty. And then, of course, it doesn't matter where else we look. And it may be worth saying that the foreign minister of the colony, Kenya, when NATO, which aggressively expanded eastwards up to the border of the Soviet Union, not the Soviet Union, apology, but Russia, which after the Soviet Union fell apart, encouraged a little country called Georgia, which is next to Russia, to invade Russia. They were very quick back. And so another military operation against the Soviet Union is in train. It may be that the Russians really shouldn't have allowed themselves to be provoked, but that is essentially what has happened. And the foreign minister of Kenya, who appears to have forgotten the history of the connection between the leading NATO country, Britain, who in Kenya acted similarly to the way leading NATO country, France, and the United States, which has this record of invasions, mashing up Panama on more than one occasion, mashing up Grenada in the 80s, and over 200 countries have been invaded at one time or another by the United States of America, sometimes where the US remained in occupation from 1915 to 1934. So how a Kenyan foreign minister could have forgotten all of that, could have forgotten that the British, who less than 10 years earlier, actually in 1945, had hanged Germans for gas chambers and concentration camps. How a Kenyan foreign minister can have forgotten that a people in his own country, the Kikuyu, who had had their land taken from them, who were engaged in a war against colonialism under the title the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, caused the British to engage in locating and confining almost all of the Kikuyu people on what was effectively a concentration camp, and causing the death of hundreds of thousands of Kikuyu. How a Kenyan minister of any kind can have forgotten that and can have been out there in the UN Security Council praising Britain and praising France and praising these terrorist countries whose record of terror, killing millions of Africans, both in the early decades of the 20th century and after the Second World War in the 20th century, quite escapes me, although it doesn't, because I understand that the people who have been put into office by imperialism in the context of neocolonialism are ready and willing and enabled to murder African people. We could spend time, and I don't intend to, looking at other places in Africa, but let us mention South Africa, run ostensibly by the ANC, once supported by perhaps all of us, if we weren't supporters of the PAC, and taken to be a liberation movement, actually engaged in armed struggle. That entity has been unable to provide reliable electricity, has been unable to get the land back to the people, have been unable to offer proper health care to the people, have been unable to offer proper employment to the people. And so there came a time when the people did not vote the ANC back into office. All right, who is the current leader of the ANC and the current president of the South African state? It is none other than the man who was 100% or more complicit in the murders of Marikana mine workers in 2012, a notorious massacre very similar to that which happened in the 1960s with white people in charge of the murder squad. This time, black people were doing it. So that is a man who came to the UK maybe 18 months ago, perhaps less than that, Cyril Ramaphosa, on an alleged state visit. What he was doing was trying to get capital from Britain and the West for South Africa. As if our people, and it is not at all odd because they have been carefully chosen and schooled, but they don't appear to have troubled to read one of the leading revolutionary Pan-Africanist theorists, Walter Rodney. And if we learned nothing else from Walter, the thing to have learned is that foreign capital is not a gift, is not beneficial. It's us get transferred to them for next to no return to us in perpetuity virtually. And so South Africa doesn't need foreign capital investment. What it needs is to take hold of and use the immense resources that it has. It's one of the most resource-rich places in the whole of the planet. So these are the circumstances of the now. And our title invites us to ask some other question, not just about nature of now, but there's some complex words in it. Praxis. Praxis we needn't detain ourselves on. In Marxism, it means a particular combination of theory and practice, in which practice is the proof of theory. So theory that doesn't have backing in actual practice is valueless. That is one of Marx's key intellectual contributions to the understanding of what we do. And then there's this reference to revolutionism. And it's important that we separate those two notions, revolutionary from Pan-Afrikanism. Now, we can take revolutionary Pan-African and put it back together. And it is possible to argue that Pan-Afrikanism has always been revolutionary, excepting when Africans agreed or been misled into deviating from it. What do I mean by that? I regard Pan-Africanism as the theory and practice by which Africans sought to obtain their freedom and the end of exploitation by forces primarily connected to or actually foreign. And so it can be argued that Pan-Africanism goes back at least to the first, if you like, arrival in Africa of European forces that have made the modern world. Now, there'll be people in the audience who will rightly say, but they came second after the Arabs and the Muslim forces and the people. So I don't actually argue that Pan-Africanism necessarily begins in the 1440s, when effectively the Europeans arrive off the west coast of Africa. But for the purposes of this presentation, I want to make that a provisional argument. So what we're talking about when we say Pan-Africanism is the theoretical and practical efforts of Africans to secure our freedom and unity, especially our freedom from capture, enslavement, and from exploitation in whatever unrighteous form it takes, especially enslavement, from external forces and their internal allies. Now, there's a big literature on Pan-Africanism. I find it frequently argued that Pan-Africanism is a 20th century movement and idea. That, I'm afraid, is wrong, but it's important to understand how that came to be believed. The word Pan-Africanism is new. The praxis of Pan-Africanism is as old as I've just been saying it is. So it's at least 500-600 years old. But in the 1890s, right here in London, from where I'm speaking, some people got together and reached out for an idea that was alive in the European world at the time. There were pan movements, pan-Hellenic, pan this, pan that, pan-Italian, radical nationalist movements directed against whatever they were directed against. Hungarian, it might be directed against Austrians. If you're Italian, it might be directed at the aim of getting Italy united as it once was under the Romans. Or if you were a Greek, it might be directed at getting Ottoman stroke Turkish forces out and so on. So there were pan movements aplenty, including the beginnings of one that doesn't have pan in its name, but modern Zionism is one of the movements at the moment. And it is that notion, Pan-Afrikanism, the African liberation ideology and practice of all Africans. So both on our continental homeland and in our diaspora, and we have Eastern as well as Western diaspora. The Western diaspora, there's an old bit of it which is has been explored and has to be understood. But the modern diaspora is largely now twofold. Along those of us who are in the West as a result of the long process of enslavement, and another much more recent part where Africans have left the continent of Africa since the Second World War, migrating to places in the Euro-American world, the United States of America and Europe. And that's the more modern part, the second part of the Africa's Western diaspora. And that second part of that diaspora, because of the recency of their departure from Africa and the live nature of their connections to our continental homeland, have a better relationship, not necessarily, but practically with our continental homeland. So Pan-Africanism as a notion in the English language dates no earlier than 1897 or 1898. Henry Sylvester Williams, a Trinidadian, and some friends of his are the first people who put the word together in English. And he it was in 1900 that actually called the first Pan-African conference, which was attended by Du Bois and a fair number of other prominent Africans from North America, from the Caribbean, and from continental Africa. And depending on how you count your Pan-African events and conferences for the 20th century, either that's number one or the one that was organized at the end of the Second World War becomes number one. Doesn't particularly matter. Much more importantly is that up until 1945, there are either 5 or 6 of them. Let's say 5, because that very important one in Manchester is famously numbered 5, and we don't really want particularly to disrupt it. But it's important that we remember and know and take seriously that there are some other larger and more fundamentally Pan-African events, conventions happening in the world, organized by by the greatest Pan-Africanist of the 20th century, Marcus Messiah Garvey. And there were 8 of them held between the USA, Jamaica, and Canada over the years between the early 1920s, actually 1920, and 1938, when Garvey, whilst living in London, ran his final convention of the Universal Convention of the Negro People of the World in Canada. For some reason, and I know why, those don't get counted in the panoply of 20th century Pan-Africanism, but they clearly belong there. For example, if you added those 8 to the 5, the 5th Pan-African Congress would be the 13th, not the 5th, and so on. And if you added the 1900 one, and Henry Sylvester Williams event, you'd increase the number by 1. That doesn't necessarily matter. What does matter is how revolutionary the ideas were during the 20th century, and how revolutionary Pan-African ideas and practice were before that 1900 event that Henry Sylvester Williams organized. I will come back to the question that I posed first, how revolutionary what is called Pan-Africanism in the 20th century was. But what is that if you take the definition that I have offered of what Pan-Africanism is, namely the movement and ideas, the praxis, if you like, of Africans directed at African unity and liberation in the modern moment of the incursion into Africa of wicked enslaving, allegedly largely Euro-Christian, largely Judeo-Christian white folk, wickedly enslaving and then wickedly colonizing, and in the process of that, wickedly genociding millions of Africans. And every effort directed against that was in and of itself almost inevitably necessarily revolutionary, because what Africans were saying is that we do not wish to be converted from what we are into a category, an anti-human category called the enslaved. And all Africans who engaged in struggle against that, and they did. If you look at the literature and civ literature on Atlantic enslavement, we're leaving aside for the moment the Arab Islamic or Arab-led or Islamic system of enslavement, which actually bigger and lasted longer and had some more wicked elements than the enslavement practiced by what a brilliant continental Africans call the predators from the sea. When they came, as I say, there's a gigantic literature, and one of the earliest and most important of the texts is Portuguese. Somebody called Azarara or Zarara wrote a two-volume, it's been translated eventually into English towards the end of the 19th century. If you go and look at those volumes, you will see that the Portuguese chronicle recounts the arrival of European forces on the continent right from the start, that there is resistance. And in Zarara, it's clear that men and women are captured, and it's clear that the first effective runaway after capture is actually an African woman. So the objective of freedom is an integral part of the what I'm calling the Pan-Africanist efforts of Africans right from the start. And that means not that a lot turns on it, but actually something does, which is that there are racist scholars who have put the argument that you can set up a chronology or a divide within African anti-enslavement, freedom-oriented resistance, and you would date it, the break, from the time of the American and French revolutions. And what these races say is that our ideas changed and improved after that. As it happens, not a thing no go so. And a former colleague of mine from the University of the West Indies, Dr. Clinton Hutton, has a small, perhaps over-complex, key point that it makes is that, and actually long before Clinton, another scholar of African America, Frederick Douglass, had made the point about Haiti and the Haitian Revolution transforming the idea of human freedom. So far from learning from the French or American Revolution that had bogus ideas of equality that excluded women, and certainly specifically excluded Africans, and even African Americans sometimes deceive themselves into believing that the founding fathers counted us as 3/5 of a human being. What they actually did was say that our ancestors would, for the purposes of allocating seats in the Senate, in the House of Representatives after the US was constituted, that Africans who had no votes and no rights would be counted as 3/5 of a person for the purposes of calculating the population of the various slave states, so that the whites, who were in relatively small numbers, would have bigger representation than they might actually have in the US legislature. That's what that 3/5 thing is about. It's not about Africans really being counted as any kind of human beings. So importantly, on continental Africa, in the transportation means, the slave ship are coming across the Atlantic, on the plantations, off the plantations, Pan-Africanist resistance is what takes place. And it is ordinary. It's about ending the system of domination and self-enabling the enslaved Africans to be free, independent, self-reproducing, economically and culturally self-reproducing too, as well as physically, human beings. So Pan-Africanism is revolutionary right from the start. And the literature develops in a kind of odd way. There's a whole body which says that is a 20th century movement. And then there are important people that date it back at least to the Haitian Revolution. The names that come to mind here are C.L.R. James and George Padmore. James's book, because he was more, tends to start more emphatically with Haiti than does Padmore's. Padmore's book is called The Life and Struggle of Negro Toilers, and Padmore and James's book is called The History of Pan-African Revolt. It has actually various titles. Came out in about 1938. Important little text. But they are important contributions to our understanding how pre-19th century and how revolutionary Pan-African praxis was. And you don't want anything more revolutionary or more fundamentally revolutionary, more expanding of the idea of who the human being is and what kind of rights the human beings have, including rights to national self-determination, which, even though the Americans had their freedom, the British, they never ever said that all other peoples, oppressed peoples, had rights similar to theirs, because they were whites. They were oppressing Indians and spreading from sea to shining sea. And as they established themselves as yet another and eventually leading white dominating place, they came into the habit of oppressing and colonizing, without saying that that's what they were doing, because they had an ideology which said that they were anti-colonial. They were only against European colonialism, not against American colonialism. But they usually found formulas that enabled them to colonize and control, to build canals, to plant tobacco and cane and cotton wherever they want, and other products, to their entire advantage. So we're talking about a movement of Africans in the period before the 1890s that is revolutionary in its objective, revolutionary in its conception of who Africans are, revolutionary in its objective that Africans must be free. And when you go, it really doesn't matter where you start. You can start in South Central Africa. You can start in the Congo kingdoms. If you do that, you'll encounter Queen Nzinga, but she's not alone, and they are fighting the Portuguese. As I say, there are Portuguese chronicles that tell the story of resistance much further up the coast from the moment the whites arrived in the 1440s, and this resistance after the late 1700s. Europeans are conquering or trying to conquer. In fact, they started to do that in the southern part of Africa, where they were allowed because the disease environment wasn't as hostile as it was in West Africa. So Europeans are not very plentiful in West Africa, but go further south and you see more of them, and they are beginning from the moment they arrive there to kill their way into possession of African people's land. And that continues right into the 20th century, and their capacity to do that has not disappeared. The wrecking of Libya is evidence of that, and we may be about to see similar against 3 or 4 African countries that turned against the mode of French neocolonial resistance. So what I've in effect and in fact been saying is that revolutionary Pan-Africanism predates and is fundamentally revolutionary the 20th century, and that in order to understand that, all we have to do is look with care, and people have done it. The whole story hasn't yet been told, but people have done it, looking at how Africans resisted colonialism and enslavement from the moment of the arrival of those processes, and to challenge foreign white power and to challenge enslavement, to say that we want a different status, we want to constitute ourselves away from the class that enslavement made us into, which is enslaved people, and into free human beings as workers, as peasants, and so on and so forth. So we're talking about the changing of the pattern of exploitation and domination in fundamental ways. That being so, if you go again and look at the literature on revolution, you will see that in most intelligent and certainly all Marxist accounts of revolution, the shift in class power, the end of one set of forces, there may be elites, but they could be classes, and the substitution of the previously exploited as their own controllers is of the essence of what revolution is about, whether you're looking at the fight against capitalism, the fight against feudalism, or whatever. So the 20th century is an important break in Pan-Africanism. At the start of the 20th century, the end of the 19th century, as I've already said, Africans start to theorize or develop on our theorization of our desire for and our deserts in relation to freedom. And you can say, King, that Pan-Africanism in the 20th century breaks into an accommodationist mode and a revolutionary mode. The accommodationists want to cooperate with colonialism, are disposed to accepting that we Africans, and it doesn't have to be Africans solely, Indians too, all of the places where European colonizing people had colonies, you will find that the movement breaks into accommodationists and revolutionaries. The accommodationists say, we're not ready, depending on where they are, depending on the level of education of the civil population, depending on the size of the elite. They say, we're not quite ready, we might be ready in 10 years, 20 years, whatever. And we'll go through processes and we allow them to bring us in slowly. We might even aim at one stage to have an Indian viceroy, or to have a black or mixed race governor, or whatever, and that will be evidence of the slow transformation of colonialism. We may even be given statuses like white dominions and become dominions like Canada or whatever. That's one line. It's accommodationist. Sometimes it's even reactionary. And the other dimension, Garvey represents, different from what happened in 1900, Henry Sylvester Williams, who wasn't backward, but he wasn't anything like as revolutionary as the Garvey who came on the scene for these purposes in 1914. Right from that moment, Garvey is effectively saying, and there are elements of ideological confusion in what Garvey is saying. He's too well disposed towards Christianity, for example, and he has oddly backward ideas of African civilization. But leave that aside. Garvey is clear that and he's from 1914. He's clear that the Europeans have put down nothing in Africa, that all they've done is taken and killed, and that they must leave. And they must leave as soon as possible now and take nothing further out. And that is the Garvey doctrine from 1914. I'm summarizing and condensing you, and you will see we don't have the whole of the 1940 the documentation of his 1914 Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. It even actually has a slightly longer title than that, but we have a lot. And what some of that documentation is in Robert Hill's collection of the Garvey papers, a very important set of documents. And that makes clear that Garvey is wanting the end of colonialism. You know, there's the occasional chalet after he gets kicked out of the United States of America. But you go and look later on at the pages of the Negro World, you go and look at the politics that's being advanced there, and you see that Garvey wants black power. He wants black power in places where we're a minority to be achieved by our cooperative self-constructing efforts. And he wants black power in places where we are the majority, for white controllers to depart because they bring nothing, and to give us our freedom, and we should even be prepared to take it. People call Marcus Garvey a capitalist, and there are two things wrong with that. One is that he was a great admirer of Lenin, because he was very much in favor, and also incidentally, of Irish revolutionaries against the British, because he understood fully that oppression, even if you were white, and even if you were being white forces, especially if they were foreigners, and also if they were capitalists, that there was nothing righteous about that, and that it made sense for the white working class, with Lenin as their leader, to set out internationally, confined sadly only to what became the Soviet Union, Russia. So Garvey praises that. When Lenin died, all of it is in the Hill volumes. When Lenin dies, Garvey has an event for him in New York, and people should go to the Hill volumes and read what Garvey says. So there is that. But importantly, when people say that Garvey is a capitalist, of course he used capitalist forms like joint stock companies and that kind of thing. But what is objectively happening is that what Garvey is doing is assembling on a collective basis, a cooperative basis within formal legal capitalist structures, the resources of Africans to achieve African ends. This is not capitalism. And the difference between Garveyite activity, which is cooperative economics for attempted liberation, and the Firestone Company, for example. The Firestone Company was a capitalist enterprise, and you can see the difference. You can see what they do to Liberians in West Africa. Big contrast to what Garvey intended to do with and for those same people, sabotaged incidentally by the Liberian, but so 20th century Pan-Africanism has these two tendencies. And one fundamentally important thing happens in 1945, which is that in what is called the Fifth Pan-African Congress, I say that it could be the 13th, but we leave that to one side. Now, what happens in that event, the Fifth Pan-African Congress, is that Africans arrive at the Garveyite position. Almost everybody, whether they're trade unionists or straightforward politician or aspiring leader, commits to going back to the Caribbean, going back to Africa, and struggling for the end of colonialism, not in 100 years' time, as the gradualists had been saying, not up until the point at which they educate us for and prepare us for self-rule, which obviously the racist perception of us Africans says that we, in our capacity, we didn't have. So importantly, that is what happens in the 1945 Congress. And it inaugurates an age in African worldwide politics that coincides with political developments elsewhere in the Arab world, in parts of Asia. The Chinese, for example, long before 1945, in fact, from the 1920s, had been engaged in a process of anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist revolution. It had been complicated by the fact that they had to fight the terrible Japanese who occupied part of their country and caused the death of 30 million is the figure, and I'm sure it's not an exaggeration that's advanced. Now, during that moment, there's a national coalition of Chinese against the Japanese, but fundamentally, the civil war resumed and the communists died. And what that victory did was to say that the West and its works, capitalism, imperialism and its works, and all those who supported it no longer belong in China and they must leave. They ended in Formosa and Taiwan. And for a while, this is not the subject of tonight's thing, so let me just pass over it very quickly. The West was saying that Formosa and Taiwan were China. That absurdity was enshrined in the UN. They occupied the Chinese UN Security Council seat until I think the time of Nixon, when that changed. Now the racist, murderous West, because they do not want effective competition from any non-white people, are actually arming those islands off China and saying that China doesn't have a right to unite its territory. These are the people who just caused a war with Russia over the claimed unity of Ukraine, which everybody knows never had the kind of national unity of the kind that the war requires. That there had been a revolution there, revolution there in between 2012 and 2014. But let us not divert ourselves. Importantly, the 1945 Fifth Pan-African Congress inaugurated a movement and a moment in African struggle, in Pan-Afrikanism. And that was talking about between accommodationists and revolutionaries seems for a moment to be buried. But it's important that we recognize that it only seemed to be buried rather than being actually buried. What can happen and did happen is that almost everybody, including right-wingers, were anti-colonialists in our part of the world, in Asia and in North Africa and so on. So everybody could coalesce under the anti-colonial banner. And it was extremely important, as the Chinese example showed, and as later the Cuban example showed, that you had to be fighting for more than the end of colonialism, because that was simply the formal form that racist imperialism took, and that there was an economic dimension which also had to be appreciated, fought, and rejected, and that at the point at which you understand that and fight against it, you were engaging against imperialism as capitalism, and that happening. Now, we might have confused ourselves about it a little bit. Not all of us, not all of our leaders, but many did. The West was never unclear about it. And they set out to cultivate amongst us a leadership that was accepting of the limited notion of colonial freedom. All we were supposed to want was one man, one vote. That's what Nelson wanted in South Africa, despite going to arms in order to get it. Never wanted anything more than that. And what the Europeans wanted us to want was nothing more than for the flag to come down, a new flag to go up, somebody, for there to be some formal change of office holding, whether or not the Queen remained as represented, deceives people. It was really neither here nor there. The flag independence was what they wanted to convince us of. And if we go back and look at the record, it's very visible in Cuba. A white comrade I know has a little book about it. It's called "They Kill Communists, Don't They?" Or a title along those lines, but "Killing Communists" is in the title. And two is the fact that if you go and look at Jamaica, if you go and look at Ghana, if you go and look at throughout the so-called now Commonwealth, British Commonwealth, what you see is jailings and killings of the most radical revolutionary of people, frequently not communists at all, but designated communists, in order to discredit them. The right-wing media, and the media is all wing, even if right-wingers say that is left-wing, is not really left-wing. The media is always right-wing. So here we have a situation which, unlike in China, there is taking place in Africa, even when armed struggle is taking place, a less revolutionary process actually underway than is capable of it being thought to be. I just mentioned the name of Nelson Mandela, and people, especially Black nationalists and African nationalists, especially African nationalists with a Marxist bent or tinge, will call Mandela and his settlement a betrayal. There is an element of betrayal, but it's important that we understand Mandela wrote, and it's very clear that even though he's close to the Communist Party of South Africa, what he wants is one man, one vote. He doesn't want a transformation of the economy. He doesn't want De Beers to disappear. He doesn't want South African resources to be owned by the South African people instead of being owned by a combination of companies in London and South Africa. He doesn't want that. He doesn't want the land to be returned to its rightful owners. He's prepared to accept a process whereby people who stole our land, a vast majority of it, become willing sellers, if so disposed. We must use our resources, our real money, to buy land back from the thieves, because we are now willing buyers. That's the ANC process on the land. So it's important that we recognize that what looked like the African Revolution had the limits of being sometimes limited, having too limited a focus on ending colonialism. And then you get a fracturing within the leadership of the African states that are coming into independence in the 50s and early 60s. You look amongst them and you see that there are people there who are taking instructions from their masters in Paris and London and Berlin and New York. They are perfectly happy to go along with the model of Africa as organized and allegedly legitimated in 1884 and 1885 at the Congress of Berlin. And a debate happens when eventually His Imperial Majesty calls a conference to establish the Organization of African Unity. A vast majority of those present are not for what Garvey is saying, and not for what Kwame Nkrumah was saying, that Garvey was saying now through his Kwame Nkrumah's voice. They were for an Africa on the model of the Europeans. Not a single state, no army, no civil service machinery, no capacity for self-government, just the capacity to fight your neighbor, to deprive those who were taken out of rights of return, to hold on to micro-citizenship and say that somebody from the micro state next door has no rights of even entry necessarily into your microstate and so on. That is what Africa has become. And the question of our topic is, do we have an ideology and a practice? Do we, in our revolutionary praxis, that can confront and defeat the structure of current oppression that the West and its stooges has imposed and is imposing upon us? Clearly, there are examples of alternative ways forward represent an example. The Cubans represent another example. The Cubans are under enormous pressure at the moment. The racist West is attempting to put China under enormous pressure. I've already said that they are trying to encircle China militarily. They've given the Australians nuclear weapons. These are the people who are prepared to obliterate Iran. That is nowhere near getting a nuclear weapon, whilst giving Australia, that doesn't need it. What does anybody need a nuclear capacity for, other than for civil purposes, which the UN agency that monitors these things has never said other than that the Iranians civil nuclear capacity. Only Israel, for Zionist destructive racist reasons, which incidentally has been given atomic weapons. Apparently they have 200 of them. Only they are determinedly saying that the Iranians are seeking nuclear weapons to be different. Everything that they do, always incredibly provocative, always with the support of the West, is about nuclear arms. There was a country in Africa that was actually given nuclear weapons, none other than South Africa. And when the West decided that maybe supporting secular Africa was ideologically impossible and militarily problematic, at that point, the nuclear weapons were withdrawn, and the Africans who inherited power there agreed to give them up without a by your leave, and that happened. So what is urgent relevance of revolutionary Pan-Africanism? We have a theorized body of thought relating to revolutionary Pan-Africanism. We have the work first of Kwame Nkrumah, we have the work of Frantz Fanon, we have the work of Walter Rodney, and a very important others. But what that work makes clear is that both the OAU and incidentally its successor, the AU, are bastions of neocolonialism, not worth the paper that they're written on, and of no value whatsoever to the process of liberating and unifying Africa. What they make clear is that the structure of the relationship between continental Africa and Africans overseas in places like the Caribbean is one fundamentally of continuing exploitation, indeed intensifying exploitation. What they make plain, I mean the Rodneys and Nkrumahs and Fanon, what they make clear is that foreign direct capitalist investment is not, and I said this much further up in the talk, what they make clear is that unlike when the US invests in cars here or in banks in the United States of America, there's a kind of relationship of equality there. What happens when white capital invests in our part of the world, whether it's in oil or bananas or bauxite or whatever? What fundamentally happens is that stuff we own today on the signature gets transferred to the white company. And that white company pretends to pay. In fact, it doesn't. Because you go and look at their books, and people would have heard me say this probably on this program once or twice before. You go and look at their books, and what they do is that via taxation and amortization and so on, within 3, at most 10 years, but usually 3 or 4 or 5, they have got back all of the money that they allegedly invested. In the case of Guyanese oil, it actually gets worse because investment was, in inverted commas, needed to develop the oil and gas fields. And all of that debt is being loaded onto Guyana. It has to be taken out of the amount extracted before any thought of anything else takes place. And Guyanese, who should have read and listened to Walter Rodney, somehow do not understand what is objectively happening. And even former colleagues of Rodney joined in this process of signing up to this. So, Revolutionary Pan-Africanism specifies that the economic order is a continuation, frequently by the same means, slightly of what was happening under colonialism at the economic level, that at the political level and the level of the armed state, what has happened is that the colonial state had become the neo-colonial state, and its willingness and capacity to murder our people is visibly in evidence as we speak. Look at Kenya. Look at Sudan. Look everywhere else. Look at Jamaica. In 2010, the government of Little Jamaica, on the evidence of a former prime minister, killed perhaps 250 people in Kingston, the capital. On their own evidence, the state admitted to killing 73. 40 were shot at close range in the head in a place called Tivoli. The equivalent of that happened 2 years later in South Africa at a place called Marikana. Incidentally, we Africans in London must put up a commemorative statue next to the one that commemorates Sharpeville in Brixton to commemorate the Marikana massacre. And I'm hoping that some people will join me in an effort to achieve that. Now, if the definition of the relationship between Africa and imperialism, or white power, of white terrorism, as specified by the likes of Walter Rodney and Kwame Nkrumah long before him, actually incredibly deeply Frantz Fanon, if that approach to the nature of the relationship isn't projected, accepted, and effectively pursued with a view to overturning it, we are going to find ourselves in the most desperate of situations. Somebody that I know of a kind said of Africa, he spoke of Africa in all her contemporary catastrophe. And he had a point. And the catastrophic nature of the African situation, unless we revolutionary Pan-Africanists find the praxis to change that state of affairs in the interest of the African masses, we Africans we might be doomed anyway, because the West is clearly in the process of ruining the planet, may already have driven it beyond a certain tipping point. That is not the subject of tonight's talk, so I'll say nothing more about that. But there is something else that we Africans need to realize, which is that ones that look like us, apparently speaking with a view to enabling us to liberate ourselves, are out there, aided and abetted, funded, if you will, by the enemy, with a view to creating amongst us a certain attitude to what we need to do in order to convert our resources, which are now said to be wholly human, to convert only those resources into the means by which we rescue ourselves. Now, I'm in favor of developing human resources, but I think there's something dangerous and anti-African about that particular approach. And what I'd like to ask my young brother to do is to play us a few minutes of a talk by one of these Africans who I think, continental Africans that is, who I think was not alone, and his equivalent exists in the diaspora in Africa. Let us listen. His name is Fred Swanker, and I hope that our brilliant young brother will play that. It may last about 5 or 7 or so minutes. Then I would like to talk briefly about how dangerous the perspective is.
I experienced my first coup d'etat at the age of 4. Because of the coup d'etat, my family had to leave our native home of Ghana and move to the Gambia. As luck would have it, 6 months after we arrived, they too had a military coup. I vividly remember being woken up in the middle of the night and gathering the few belongings we could and walking for about 2 hours to a safe house. For a week, we slept under our beds because we were worried that bullets might fly through the window. Then at the age of 8, we moved to Botswana. This time, it was different. There were no coups. Everything worked. Great education. They had such good infrastructure that even at the time they had a fiber optic telephone system, long before it had reached Western countries. The only thing they didn't have is that they didn't have their own national television station. And so I remember watching this TV from neighboring South Africa and watching Nelson Mandela in jail being offered a chance to come out if he would give up the apartheid struggle. But he didn't. He refused to do that until he actually achieved his objective of freeing South Africa from apartheid. And I remember feeling how just one good leader could make such a big difference in Africa. Then at the age of 12, my family sent me to high school in Zimbabwe. Initially, this too was amazing. Growing economy, excellent infrastructure, and it seemed like it was a model for economic development in Africa. I graduated from high school in Zimbabwe and went off to college. 6 years later, I returned to the country. Everything was different. It had shattered into pieces. Millions of people had emigrated. The economy was in a shambles, and it seemed all of a sudden that 30 years of development had been wiped out. How could a country go so bad so fast? Most people would agree that it's all because of leadership. One man, President Robert Mugabe, is almost single-handedly responsible for having destroyed this country. Now, all these experiences of living in different parts of Africa, growing up, did two things to me. The first is it made me fall in love with Africa. Everywhere I went, I experienced the wonderful beauty of our continent and saw the resilience and the spirit of our people. And at the time, I realized that I wanted to dedicate the rest of my life to making this continent great. But I also realized that making Africa great would require us addressing this issue of leadership. You see, all these countries I lived in, the coup d'etats and the corruption I'd seen in Ghana and Gambia and in Zimbabwe, contrasted with the wonderful examples I'd seen in Botswana and in South Africa of good leadership made me realize that Africa would rise or fall because of the quality of our leaders. Now, one might think, of course, leadership matters everywhere. But if there's one thing you take away from my talk today, it is this. In Africa, more than anywhere else in the world, the difference that just one good leader can make is much greater than anywhere else. And here's why. It's because in Africa we have weak institutions, like the judiciary, the constitution, civil society, and so forth. So here's a general rule of thumb that I believe in. When societies have strong institutions, the difference that one good leader can make is limited. But when you have weak institutions, then just one good leader can make or break that country. Let me make it a bit more concrete. You become the president of the United States. You think, wow, I've arrived. I'm the most powerful man in the world. So you decide, perhaps let me pass a law. All of a sudden, Congress taps you on the shoulder and say, no, you can't do that. You say, let me try this way. The Senate comes and says, we don't think you can do that. You say, perhaps let me print some money. I think the economy needs a stimulus. The central bank governor will think you're crazy. You might get impeached for that. But if you become the president of Zimbabwe, they say, I really like this job. I think I'd like to stay in it forever. Well, you just can. You decide you want to print money. You call the central bank governor and say, please, double the money supply. He'll say, okay, yes, sir. Is there anything else I can do for you? This is the power that African leaders have. And this is why they make the most difference on the continent. The good news is that the quality of leadership in Africa has been improving. We've had 3 generations of leaders in my mind. Generation 1 are those who appeared in the 50s and 60s. These are people like Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana and Julius Nyerere of Tanzania. The legacy they left is that they brought independence to Africa. They freed us from colonialism, and let's give them credit for that. They were followed by Generation 2. These are people that brought nothing but havoc to Africa. Think warfare, corruption, human rights abuses. This is the stereotype of the typical African leader that we typically think of. Mobutu Sese Seko from Zaire, Sani Abacha from Nigeria. The good news is that most of these leaders have moved on, and they were replaced by Generation 3. These are people like the late Nelson Mandela and most of the leaders that we see in Africa today, like Paul Kagame and so forth. Now, these leaders are by no means perfect. But the one thing they have done is that they've cleaned up much of the mess of Generation 2. They've stopped the fighting. And I call them the stabilizer generation. They're much more accountable to their people. They've improved macroeconomic policies. And we're seeing for the first time, Africa's growing. And in fact, it's the second fastest growing economic region in the world. So these leaders are by no means perfect, but they are by and large the best leaders we've seen in the last 50 years. So where to from here? I believe that the next generation to come after this, Generation 4, has a unique opportunity to transform the continent. Specifically, they can do 2 things that previous generations have not done. The first thing they need to do is they need to create prosperity for the continent. Why is prosperity so important? Because none of the previous generations have been able to tackle this issue of poverty. Africa today has the fastest growing population in the world, but also is the poorest. By 2030, Africa will have a larger workforce than China, and by 2050, it'll have the largest workforce in the world. 1 billion people will need jobs in Africa. So if we don't grow our economies fast enough, we're sitting on a ticking time bomb, not just for Africa, but for the entire world. Let me show you an example of one person who's living up to this legacy of creating prosperity. Letitia. Letitia is a young woman from Kenya who at the age of 13 had to drop out of school because her family couldn't afford to pay fees for her. So she started a little business rearing rabbits, which happened to be a delicacy in this part of Kenya that she's from. This business did so well that within a year she was employing 15 women and was able to generate enough income that she was able to send herself to school, and through these women fund another 65 children to go to school. The profits that she generated, she used that to build a school, And today, she educates 400 children in her community. And she's just turned 18. Another example is Eric Rajonari. Eric comes from the island of Madagascar. Now, Eric realized that agriculture would be the key to creating jobs in the rural areas of Madagascar. But he also realized that fertilizer was a very expensive input for most farmers in Madagascar. And Madagascar has these very special bats that produce these droppings that are very high in nutrients. In 2006, Eric quit his job as a chartered accountant and started a company to manufacture fertilizer from the bat droppings. Today, Eric has built a business that generates several $1 million of revenue. And he employs 70 people full-time and another 800 people during the season when the bats drop their droppings the most. Now, what I like about this story is that it shows that opportunities to create prosperity can be found almost anywhere. Eric is known as the Batman. And who would have thought that you would have been able to build a multi-million-dollar business employing so many people just from bat poo? The second thing that this generation needs to do is to create our institutions. They need to build these institutions such that we're never held to ransom again by a few individuals like Robert Mugabe. Now, all this sounds great. But where are we going to get this generation 4 from? Do we just sit and hope that they emerge by chance, or that God gives them to us? No, I don't think so. It's too important an issue for us to leave it to chance. I believe that we need to create African institutions, homegrown, that will identify and develop these leaders in a systematic, practical way. We've been doing this for the last 10 years through the African Leadership Academy. Letitia is one of our young leaders. Today we have 700 of them that are being groomed for the African continent. And over the next 50 years, we expect to create 6,000 of them. But one thing has been troubling me. We would get about 4,000 applications a year for 100 young leaders that we could take into this academy. And so I saw the tremendous hunger that existed for this leadership training that we're offering. But we couldn't satisfy it. So today, I'm announcing for the first time in public an extension to this vision for the African Leadership Academy. We're building 25 brand new universities in Africa that are going to cultivate this next generation of African leaders. And each campus will have 10,000 leaders at a time. So we'll be educating and developing 250,000 leaders at any given time. Over the next 50 years, this institution will create 3 million transformative leaders for the continent. My hope is that half of them will become the entrepreneurs that we need, who will create these jobs that we need, and the other half will go into government and non-profit sector, and they'll build the institutions that we need. But they won't just learn academic, they'll also learn how to become leaders, and they'll develop their skills as entrepreneurs. So think of this as Africa's Ivy League. But instead of getting admitted because of your SAT scores, or because of how much money you have, or which family you come from, the main criteria for getting into this university will be what is your potential that you have for transforming Africa. But what we're doing is just one group of institutions. We cannot transform Africa by ourselves. My hope is that many, many other homegrown African institutions will blossom. And these institutions will all come together with a common vision of developing this next generation of African leaders, Generation 4. And they'll teach them this common message: create jobs, build our institutions. Nelson Mandela once said, every now and then, a generation is called upon to be great. You can be that great generation. I believe that if we carefully identify and cultivate the next generation of African leaders, then this Generation 4 that is coming up will be the greatest generation that Africa, and indeed the entire world, has ever seen. Thank you.
My brother?
Yes, Elder Cecil, go ahead.
Okay. Now, why did I play? Thank you for playing that. All of that. A little bit longer than I'd remembered, but no harm done. Why did I play all of that? Because of its plausibility, and its plausibility despite its fundamentally anti-African nature, not necessarily immediately visible. This is a brother who has no relationship to African history. His life and his approach to Africa begins with his own life, and it begins with his experience of coups and schooling. So because he has no sense of African history, no African history 101 in his head, Africa only had one enemy, historically colonialism, and it's dead, killed by one of the generations of which he mentions. And the only other enemy that Africa has is internal bad leaders. It had even the beginning of a sense of recent African history, let alone distant African history, he would know that the men of second generation, who he rightly denounced, were in fact the creatures of the West. They called them our bastards, and their purpose was to hold Africa for them, to defend their interest in Africa, to kill as necessary in Africa, to store African resources abroad, and so on. That is what they did. And you can go and trace all of them down, and you will see exactly who they were. So these are not bad African leaders as a point of departure. They can only be understood in the context of how the West constructed neocolonialism in Africa, and the agents of that neocolonialism was. In addition to that, he laughs at Robert Mugabe and blames Robert Mugabe for what happened in Zimbabwe, which incidentally he does not begin to understand. He needed to know that had Mugabe stepped down earlier, and I'm not in favor of leaders remaining in power for all of their life, but had Mugabe stepped down, he would have handed power to somebody called Morgan Shangarai, who had been selected by the white farmers and was being paid and processed and produced by them for their purpose. And he was corralled by Robert Mugabe into a national coalition in which his entity ended up agreeing with the objectives of the ZANU-PF. This man does not know that in 1980, the West agreed to provide Zimbabwe with the money to buy the stolen lands of the Wami, and then reneged on that commitment, which is why the former resistance fighters forced Robert's hands into taking the land, which was theirs anyway, and just legally taking what was legally theirs. The theft process was clear and known to history. The white world had conceded that and then, as I say, gone back on it. Robert Mugabe is not the cause of what happened in Zimbabwe. The West and its determination that the Zimbabwe case of land redistribution away from white hands wasn't to happen because there are more important instances in South Africa and Namibia, and they mustn't be defeated on the first terrain, which was Zimbabwe. This man cannot be teaching Africans anything if he doesn't know any of that. And there's so much more that he doesn't know. So his educational enterprise is going to produce a set of Africans who don't have History 101, who have no sense of who the enemies of Africa are, who believe some relationship between prosperity and the end of poverty without actually understanding precisely how that works, and so on. So I have some friends on Galaxy Radio who talk about Africation, and I think Swaneka's head is in desperate need of Africation and awareness of the riches of Africa, who Africa's enemies are, how since the Second World War in African history has to be understood, who read some Fanon and Rodney and Nkrumah, who read some Garvey, and so on. Only Africans with those elements of knowledge in their heads will have anything to offer to Africa. So Swaneka's millions of people, and he's being funded to produce them, will be like Obama, will be like Bomber Obama, be like the man who said when he arrived in the White House, I myself am the change, and proceeded to simply run the system. When African Americans justifiably rioted on a relatively small scale, Obama came on the television and said that America is a country built on law. And how somebody who has even half an African American connection can say that and say it seriously and truthfully leaves a great deal to be desired and even more to be understood. Swaneka and Swaneka types. This man, incidentally, his only problem with the West is that he was in a suit in New York after a university degree, and racist white taxi drivers were going past him. He doesn't say it in this lecture. He says it somewhere else. There's a lot of him up there that people can go and look at and judge. So importantly, an alternative to revolutionary Pan-Africanism is being offered to Africans, funded by the West and led by Swaneka. We Africans need to be careful of that gentleman and of that historical tendency, however well funded and however plausible it appears to be. Thank you. I'm resting there, my brother.
Tenamwale, give thanks, Elder Cecil, as always. Insightful and important information, perspective analysis, as usual. Brothers and sisters, we're going to engage in our discussion at this point. Yeah, so I'm going to begin by, interrogating our elder and getting some, deeper insight on the topics that he's raised, on the subjects that he's elucidated on this evening. You can feel free to do the same. Initially, please type in the chat if you have a question or a comment that you would like me to read out for the consideration of Elder Cecil. And please, to distinguish your comment from other comments in the chat that are just for the chat, please at gotkushTV or at Kimbunga Media. Yeah. And so that's where they're right now, brothers and sisters. For those who are not aware, we are currently in transition between the 10th of June and the 17th of Mosiah August. We are transitioning the name of this platform from gotkushTV to Kimbunga Media. And for those who are not aware, Kimbunga in the Kiswahili language means whirlwind, because Marcus Garvey said, look for me in the whirlwind. And so we are certainly the whirlwind of Mosiah. And so, yeah, we're just getting you used to certain dynamics, because from after the 17th of Mosiah, it's just going to be strictly at Kimbunga Media. Yeah. So you can at either or if you would like me to read out your comment for Elder Cecil to consider. And if we have little time and them thing there, maybe we'll put out the link and invite a couple of you to come live and interact in voice. Right, Elder Cecil, you traversed the whole heap of history there in terms of revolutionary Pan-Africanism. I do want to begin though, because I did mention at the beginning of the show that last month was the 50th anniversary of the 6th Pan-African Congress, which took place in Tanzania. Yes. And when I became aware of this, well, when it came back to my consciousness, let's put it that way, I was aware of the fact that I hadn't scheduled any programming to market and that we needed to. But you had proposed this particular subject. And so I thought, well, we could at least mark it, yeah, in the context of this discussion right here. And well, first of all, could you just give our viewers an explanation of the significance of the 6th Pan-African Congress? You did go into some detail about the 5th Pan-African Congress. What are the significance of the 6th Pan-African Congress?
Okay. It took place, as you correctly say, in Tanzania in 1974. Did I get the year right?
Yes,
right?
1974.
Yes, 74. And it was called and organized and by Julius Nyerere. It's said to have been the first Pan-African Congress to take place on African soil. That's both true and not true. It's true if you stick with a model of what the Pan-African Congress is and how you count, but there had been 2 conferences in 1958 called by Kwame Nkrumah that were congresses of revolutionary anti-colonial forces, and we have the documentation from those events, and they need to be borne in mind when we talk about when we talk of the history of Pan-Africanism in between the mid-50s and the mid-70s. Having said that, what else can I say? We in the UK sent a delegation, as did a gigantic delegation go from African America and the delegation and some from the Caribbean. There was a difficulty involving them because some of the radicals from the Caribbean had difficulties with their backward neocolonial governments who stood in the way of them going.
Yes.
So all of that is part of the story. The group that went from here are an important part of UK, African UK history, because we prepared documentation on our condition here. The leading figure in that delegation was none other than Ron Phillips, who adopted an African name, continental African name later, and eventually also went, and I had grave doubts about why he did this to back to Guyana. But importantly, the delegation helped Ron and others, especially Ron, to prepare the documents which analyzed our situation here to that event. When they came back, and it was a delegation from all over the country, people from Manchester, Ron plus, people from Birmingham, Brother Binney plus, people from Wolverhampton, the name of that person doesn't come to mind, and people from Nottingham and London, and possibly Liverpool, all went. So it was a genuine UK African delegation, and it went armed with theoretical analysis of how we are connected to racist British capitalism in this place in which we live, as one example, an African community in a racist imperialist center. That delegation sought to organize a national community organization, and in fact made progress on it. And then Ron was invited by the Nigerian government to be their organizer of Festac, and he effectively left the organizing that he was doing for what was then the PAC and later became the PACM to run Festac. I think he eventually got dismissed by them. I'm not clear about the detail, but he didn't see that job right through to the end, or he wasn't allowed to see that job right through to the end. And so there's another African event, 77 Festac in Nigeria, which is an important cultural gathering, which maybe some attention should be paid to on a forum, a platform like this at some stage. I didn't go myself, but a lot of people now long in the tooth from here went. Amon Sabasakana, I know, went, and others did, and maybe he could be asked to reminisce on Festac. One other important for me, and it is Walter Rodney's paper to the Sixth Pan-African Congress, which he didn't physically deliver because he wasn't in Tanzania and he may have been ill to go back, or something else might have prevented him from going back. But importantly, that is a core paper of revolutionary Pan-Africanism. Walter, for those who have doubts about how it works, puts the class dimension into post-war Pan-Africanism, confronts the enemy of Africa as imperialism externally, confronts the enemy of Africa as an internal class fraction that runs places on behalf of imperialism. We call them the neocolonial leadership. And it's a fundamentally important paper which everybody should read. And I think that in terms of the incidentally, papers came from it. The East African Publishing House has a collection of them out. Horace Campbell has another collection of them, and so on. So the documentation from the Sixth Pack is in fact available. If I have in front of me, I would not have any difficulty pulling out a rebound book on the Sixth Pan-African Congress. Yeah, so an important event, and one that on the basis of Walter Rodney's intervention, if nobody else's, but he wasn't alone, helps us to see the praxis of revolutionary Pan-Africanism being further developed and concretized in the period since the mid-1970s, when what was fundamentally happening is that the West is white supporting dictators almost on an Africa-wide basis. And those are the people that Swanika calls the second generation, but they weren't independently wicked African misleaders. They were agents of a process that deliberately operated against African interest on behalf of that set of people and their class masters. You're muted, my brother.
Apologies. Give thanks for that, Elder Cecil. For those who are unaware, our ancestor Walter Rodney's essay for the 6th Pan-African Congress is entitled "Aspects of the International Class Struggle in Africa, the Caribbean, and America." Yeah, very important. And the history of the Africans from the Caribbean need to know about what happened. Yeah, in terms of the Caribbean delegation to the 6th Pan-African Congress. It should be a matter of historical study in every school, yeah, throughout the Caribbean, because it alone demonstrates the true nature of neocolonialism as it exists in the Caribbean. Having said that, I've got a few questions that stem from this understanding of the 6th Pan-African Congress here, but let me start with this one. Yeah, and all of my questions relate to what you've elucidated in your presentation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In looking at the leadership on the continent, putting Fred Swanika to the side for 1 second.
Yeah.
Walter Rodney engages in a significant critique of the leadership on the continent. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
From a revolutionary Pan-African perspective. But his critique includes those that, as revolutionary Pan-Africanists, one might consider to be the revolutionary ones. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I don't know how deeply you're familiar with this particular critique, but he delivers a speech. I think it's for Afrikan Liberation Day in the 70s, and I believe it's in America. And he basically critiques the nature of governments on the African continent, and he includes Nkrumah and Nyerere specifically. Yes.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that critique? And was he correct, or did he require more nuance in his analysis on that point?
In my reading of Walter, he's never other than nuanced. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is that let me not claim to be familiar with the specific speech you're pointing to, but it's important that you will find that Walter's critique of Nyerere and his critique of Nkrumah won't be identical, because the class content, particularly of late Nkrumah, but not just late Nkrumah, is Nkrumah has a class politics, and it's fundamentally revolutionary Pan-Africanist politics, and Nyerere doesn't have that. He's a good African Democrat, and he has a healthy orientation towards the people, but he's not really in any fundamental way an African socialist. And importantly, from my point of view, Rodney doesn't say this. He agreed wrongly with and was a supporter of the outcome of the 1963 event in Ethiopia, in Addis, that set up that set up the OAU. He also did other important stuff. Tanzania was fundamentally important. Unfortunately, it was far away from South Africa to the liberation struggle in South Africa. And Nyerere is 100% solid on that one. So we can, on some future occasion, this is not setting up an invite to get myself back on, but we can on some
you are for the record, you are allowed to do that, Elder Cecil.
But I think that Walter Rodney's work is so important that studies devoted to it matter, and this platform under its new name or under Gotkush, which I quite like too, is the place for people to know, why Walter was so important and why imperialism and its agents in Guyana killed him in the way that they did.
They did, yeah. I understood. So I you know what? If I had known I was actually going to ask this question, and I should have, I'd actually prepared the snippet of the speech in question to play for you, so you could consider it. But just to say that this, as you find it on the net, the speech is entitled "Crisis in the Periphery: Africa and the Caribbean." Yeah, crisis in the periphery.
I do know that essay. I haven't read it recently, but I do know.
Right.
It. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so, but from my recollection, one of the things that he critiques, particularly Nkrumah on, is, for example, getting the people to vote for a one-party state. He seems to he proceeds his critique by saying that the issue of voting may not on the face of it might be considered a revolutionary issue, particularly revolutionary, but he sees it as important in terms of galvanizing the quote-unquote working class, and it seems to me that he considers Nkrumah's one-party state as a contravention, a subversion, or a betrayal of being able to galvanize the thoughts, the opinions, the agency of the working class in Ghana. So if I said that, I don't know if you have a response to that specifically, or and I agree with you. We do need to dedicate some time specifically to that critique so we can go into more depth. But
yes, I would like to reserve my position on that.
Right.
It is clearly correct that Walter had difficulty, theoretical and practical difficulty, with the African one-party state.
Right.
And he himself didn't make any moves in anything like that direction back home in Guyana. In the 60s and 70s, it was possible for errors to be made by people like Nkrumah, who came out of a history of genuine mobilization, who thought that he had that mobilization captured in his party, and knew that reactionary social forces were coming at him, both domestic, chiefly, and aristocratic, and so on, and saw himself and progress, including revolutionary progress, as needing to be protected using machinery that raises political questions about both its appropriateness and effectiveness, because it didn't protect him in the end.
Yeah. Well, yeah. All right, Roberts, this is another subject for another time. And because it's an important one, so I want to do it proper justice. So now, to get back to your presentation, by the way, so what was you mentioned a book by Clinton Hutton and I missed the
Yes.
title of the book. Could you just
Yeah. I
give us the
don't
title
know
of the
it.
book?
I don't even have the title of. I mean, I own Clinton's book, but it's somewhere
Right.
in Jamaica, and it's
Okay.
extremely expensive. It's extremely expensive to buy, and actually needs to be reprinted. But what
Right.
Clinton does, in very highfalutin language, is to talk about. No, it's fine. I mean, I love Clinton. I know him.
No,
But
of course.
yeah, it is in highfalutin language, and
Yes.
but what he does is to attempt, actually quite successfully, to theorize the nature of the advance in the idea of rights and who is entitled to them. That
Right.
the Haitian Revolution inscribed on history. Yeah, and I repeat, Clinton does that in a very maybe over theorized manner, in a very thin book. And I don't mean thin as in light. I mean
Yes.
actually small. It's not a
Small,
big
yeah.
book, and the title is not in my head at the moment.
Okay, no problem. We'll research that.
Yeah, and the other thing, and I mentioned this too, is that our African American 19th century brother, some people say the most photographed man in the 19th century world, Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass did a lecture. This would have been in something like the 1880s or 1890s, called Lecture on the Haitian Revolution.
Right.
Something close to that. And all of the points about how important, this is 5 decades before James, okay. All of the points about the importance of the Haitian Revolution, about Africans asserting our right to nationhood, our right to freedom, etc., etc., etc. All of those points are brilliantly and simply, very directly made in that actually quite remarkable lecture on the Haitian Revolution by Frederick Douglass, which people should look up and try to read.
Okay. Now, Elder Cecil, let's get to Fred, our good brother Fred, right?
Yes.
And Fred's interesting appraisal of African history, yeah.
Yes.
Now it's interesting. You charge us with the responsibility of employing the revolutionary Pan-Africanist praxis, and we're gonna come back to this term, revolutionary Pan-Africanism, in a second, yeah. But one of the factors and one of the goals, that Fred mentions in his presentation is the fact that Africa is a continent with a fast growing population and will have the largest workforce, I believe he said, by the year 2030. So that means effectively what he's saying is that Africa will overtake China as far as its workforce is concerned. By the year 2030. The interesting thing about, and so these people are going to need to be employed. They're going to need employment.
Yes.
If we compare his projection to a retrospective analysis of China and how they took advantage of their large labor force and effectively made it a tool and gave Western corporations access to that labor force by devaluing their labor, as a part of a project of taking so many million people out of poverty and industrializing. Well, China was already industrialized, but bringing China into modern, making China a modern technological giant. Would you suggest that strategy lies within, should be considered under the banner of revolutionary Pan-African praxis in today's world? Is that what we should be aiming to do as African people?
No. No. I don't believe, although it's arguable, that the phrase that you just used, China devaluing its labor force, is actually accurate. Everybody knows that what is said, that China took, it's billions of people out of poverty, is actually a correct claim. So the Chinese workers gained from the transition from the countryside to the factory, and they did stuff with the people who were left in the countryside that was to their benefit. In addition to that, the relationship between foreign capital in China and foreign capital in Africa has to be properly understood and analyzed. And that analysis that you just advanced doesn't actually do that. Further problem. Africa has this gigantic youthful population. Africa has also, and much more than China, the world's store of natural resources. And it's Swanica wants to leave the relationship between those resources and the West intact. I have a lecture by him in which he says that we must forget about the wealth that's under the ground. Well, the way it presently stands, we can forget about it anyway because we don't own it. And it's if that wealth is to become available to be part of the way in which Africa gets transformed, then how it's owned and developed, and how you find capital to make those resources into manufactured items is the challenge that we face. But it won't be a repeat of China, which is very low on resources. The other difference is that it looks as if the Chinese managed very quickly a higher level of education, popular education, than is immediately available in Africa. In addition to that, don't hold me to that proposition. But there's something there. Also, it matters that the language of the workers available to international capital in China was one language, in a way that is not the case in Africa, right? Those are the questions that come to mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but there are others. There are successful capitalist operators in Africa. The most famous of them is Dangote. I'm in favor. I'm not against those operators in exactly the way that the Chinese, when their Communist Party came to power, didn't chop off the heads of Chinese capitalists. They mobilized them to the cause of the people and left them with a whole heap. So the model of what Dangote and his likes are doing on the continent matters. And I don't think it's Swanica's model quite, or that Swanica and his like are paying sufficient attention to right. And I mean, Swanika comes out of a Western business school, intellectual framework, and I don't believe that it's all that relevant, actually, other than in the terms that he, in this lecture, he said, which is in favor of finding entrepreneurial opportunities and developing them. And again, I'm not against that. His rabbit lady and his bat gentleman are fine. And so, but that's not the path to African development. It leaves Africa's gold, Africa's oil, Africa's uranium, African diamonds, and a long list entirely in the wrong hands. And if Africa is to be developed, and if Africans' workforce is to be employed, mobilizing that stuff in the interest of Africa, as opposed to in the interest of the current owners of those resources, is a problem that we're going to have to solve. And that is the focus of revolutionary Pan-Africanism, certainly one of them.
Which brings me to my next question. And my last question, and the next question I'm going to ask, is based upon a lot of the propaganda that is out there now, to subvert a proper revolutionary Pan-African analysis. And by the way, to your point on the inadequacies of my analysis, or the analysis that was given in the question, which is the typical narrative, by the way, on China's economic rise, a good person to read for brothers and sisters is a political scientist called Yuen Ang. She is a Singaporean of Chinese heritage, and has written a number of books on China's economic development. One is how China escaped the poverty trap, and another is China's Gilded Age. So for a correction, as Elder Cecil has said, in terms of the proper analysis of China's economic development, do check out that particular author's work, and or her many presentations over YouTube. The key card now. Pardon me?
No, go.
But, one of the key cards, Elder Cecil, in the neo-colonial globalization analysis at the moment is the issue of Botswana. And a couple shows ago, I was flaming up this Botswana model, because they tell us that Botswana is the model that the rest of Africa should be pursuing. I don't know how deeply you are knowledgeable about Botswana, but
I'm going to say next to none.
Right. To cut a long story short,
Botswana and Rwanda
right,
are the two that get a lot of attention, and insofar as I've had time and inclination, I've spent it more on Rwanda than Botswana.
Well, you feel free to add an analysis of Rwanda to my question, to your answer. All right. But the long story short is, the narrative is that Botswana developed stable institutions, and got rid of corruption and embraced the free market, right? So Botswana is now this outlier among the African nations who, after independence, embraced capitalism, whereas everybody else supposedly embraced socialism and therefore killed their economies as a result. But what Botswana did was, in the height of the anti-apartheid movement and the anti-colonial movement, the government went into business with the corporate neocolonizer in chief, which is De Beers. So it formed a company that became known as Debswana. Initially, the government stake in the company was at something like 12 or 15%, and then that rose to 50%. Over a period of time. And so basically, Botswana's economy has grown basically off of diamond mining, from since that time, since the 60s up until now, but based upon an unholy alliance with with a deep colonizer that was a company founded by what's his name? Cecil Rhodes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which essentially, when you check it, they gave this criminal enterprise legitimacy within the context of an anti-colonial movement, and were effectively rewarded for doing so. Yeah. Right. That was saying. Yeah. So go on. So, the question really is that these are the models that they're giving us, and you could, like I said, you could add Rwanda, but to your answer. But why are these models insufficient from a revolutionary Pan-African perspective?
Yes, right. One thing that has to be said is that the other countries that are said to have embraced socialism did not.
Right.
so
right.
That's the first thing to be said. And then Botswana particularly is actually a very rich place with a very small population. There are problems with how they've handled some traditional peoples. The relationship that you have correctly pointed to with a variant of De Beers explains the availability of resources to the state or to the entity that runs the place in alliance with the De Beers entity. And it is perfectly possible for situations in which large resources are available if you manage it properly. Gaddafi, some of the one or two of the Arab states, you can using various models and social approaches produce a relatively well-off small population, which is what has happened. It says nothing at all about capitalism. What objectively talks about is how a ruling circle of a particular kind can be accommodated by international capitalism, and can accommodate itself to international capitalism if it has enough resources to play with. And the Botswana ruling circle did have that and does still have that.
Cecil, you there?
Yeah. So that's what I'd like to say briefly about Botswana, which I repeat I've done beyond that. Next to no work. And Rwanda is another of those, and I'm sure you've had discussion of it.
Of course.
On your platform. But the other day, I mean, within the last 6 months, there's a brother here, actually two very different men, who went to Rwanda and came back singing its praises.
Absolutely.
Against what's our brother from the Congo who has a wonderful analysis? He's in Uhuru.
Brother Luezi.
Yes. Now, Luez's analysis of Rwanda in relation to DCR, it's not just his.
Of course.
And so the case for the Rwanda model is actually very thin and problematic. And it's like the way people used to go to Germany and Italy in the 1930s and praise Mussolini and Hitler. I'm not saying that either of the people who run either of those places are Hitlers, but it's the same kind of thing where if you have an orderly and reasonably well-run transport system and clean streets and so on, which is what the people are pointing to, that go there and come back singing his praises, and I'm, without being an expert, unconvinced about either of those cases. I think the Botswana instance is kind of quite pernicious, but less pernicious than the Rwanda and the Rwanda instance.
All right, give thanks for that, Elder Cecil. I want to ask you, by the way, brothers and sisters, if you want to ask a question or have a comment ready for Elder Cecil, please at gotkushTV. I've got a couple already, so I'm going to come to them in a second. But let me get this ideological point out the way, Elder Cecil. Now, this is a personal. Yes. This is a personal one from me. Yeah. So, would it be true to say that the term revolutionary Pan-Afrikanism, in a formal sense, is really established at the 6th Pan-African Congress in 1974?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think I see what you're saying, but I wouldn't say that. Most of Nkrumah's work predates that event. Right.
Yes.
And
well, all of it does, given the fact that he passed away in 1932. But yeah.
Brilliant point, my brother. Let me say how brilliant you are. It's the God's truth. So yes. Nothing were happening in the area of theory and practice that we're talking about. Fanon's work already existed. A great deal of Rodney's work already existed. And the brother, what's his name, who writes on French West Africa, already existed. Samir Amin already existed. So 74 was a jamboree for progressives, providing their neo-colonial governments allowed them to go and participate in the jamboree. But I don't think anything new, with the exception of Walter's paper, came out of that. The other complication is, and this is a very personal memory. Our delegation from here went to the neighboring country, Siad Barre. What was that?
Somalia.
And they came back. I remember Ron particularly singing the praises of the Somalian revolution. And at the time, I didn't know what to make of it. I'm not sure that I've done enough work even now to understand it. But that fell apart and disappeared in remarkably quick time. But it's just worth registering that Somalia was in the frame in 74 in a way that gets forgotten and underanalyzed. And the other thing that's worth mentioning, just in terms of my own awareness, is the by then former Vice President of Tanzania, Babu, who ended up living in the UK, and who I met in the context of organizing the 7th Pack. A lot of organizing for which happened here in London.
Yes, in the UK.
And not enough attention seems to me to be paid to him and his work.
Absolutely. He got in trouble with Nyerere at one point. They had some differences. But Abdul Rahman Muhammad Babu is entirely important, brothers and sisters. You'll find his name in the mouth of Omowale Malcolm X significantly in the last few months of his life. He actually visited Malcolm X in the USA. and you have speeches of Malcolm X introducing him, and speaking of the role that he played in the
Zanzibar Revolution.
Right. Yes. Particularly
another instance of forgotten continental African revolutionary upsurge that we have to understand better.
Absolutely. And your point about Somalia is well taken. There is a significant Pan-African history in Somalia that is all but forgotten. It kind of begins to die out in the 1970s. But Somalia even has a whole Pan-African arts movement. And I've come across some of the music of that movement. Yeah. I think I've even opened a few shows of it a couple of years ago. If one song was a Pan-African song from Somalia, bad tune, serious tune. You know what I'm saying? And another subject for another time. But the reason why I asked the question is because but my ideological question is concerning some of the contents of the declaration, the Sixth Pan-African Congress declaration, yes, and how it defines revolutionary Pan-Africanism, which is why, although I'm a revolutionary, I'm a Pan-Africanist, but I've tended to refer to myself as what you might describe as a small r, small p revolutionary Pan-Africanist, because of how things were formally defined, and I'll give you an example of what I mean right now, and this relates to one of our previous discussions on the issue of race. So I'm reading from the General Declaration of the Sixth Pan-African Congress, and what they say, they're defining revolutionary Pan-Africanism here, and so you can see the points here, that new perspective, revolutionary Pan-Africanism can now bring the world revolution to the universal progress, its original and prolific contribution. This is why the urgent needs at the present time can be outlined as being, and it says to put an end to foreign domination in Africa, to get rid of neocolonialism. This one's important because it relates to the now, and I'm going to ask you about this in a second. But it says to liquidate foreign military bases in African states, and the Caribbean, as a contribution to achievement of the political independence and total liberation of Africa and the Caribbean. Yes, that's very important. That this military bases issue is more an issue now than it was in 1974. Right? You know what I'm saying? So consolidate the unity between the peoples of Africa and African descent and all peoples. Strategy of revolutionary Pan-Africanism is basically defined in terms of anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist, anti-neocolonialist, anti-capitalist, anti-racist struggle, and then points under that one, that the people must form the basis of this generalized struggle, that it must be defined in terms of class struggle at the national and international level. Now there is where my departures begin, right? You know what I'm saying? Because as a Gavi, I'm defining things in terms of race and culture. And then that particular point is elucidated further in points 8 and 9, where it says in 1974 Pan-Africanism aims, and you could put revolutionary before that because that's what they're defining here, at the complete restoration by African peoples of their dignity and responsibility, the radical transformation of the whole society, the whole of mankind, and the fullest development of man, as well as the building of socialist societies. Now, obviously, coming from a nationalist organization, we challenge this designation right here. But then it goes on to say, Pan-Africanism therefore excludes all racial, tribal, ethnic, religious, or chauvinist considerations. It embraces the cause of all oppressed peoples of the world and is opposed to all reactionary forces throughout the world. Now, we don't have a problem embracing the cause of all oppressed peoples, right? You know what I'm saying? But then if to do that, we have to exclude all racial considerations, that's a challenge to a nationalist, a challenge to a Gavi. So how do we process, Elder Cecil, this definition, this defining of revolutionary Pan-Africanism within the context?
It's easy to process. I did say, are you hearing me?
Yes, I.
Yeah, it's easy to process. I did say that the six-pack was, in a way, a radical Pan-Africanist jamboree, right? So the declaration, one of the things about those people is that they have a commitment to class that doesn't incorporate and take seriously race, which is contrary to Walter's line, contrary to my own approach, and certainly nobody who respects Garvey is going to. So what's going on is something that, as you probably know or recall, I'm actually working on. We have to understand what happened with race in the period since the Second World War.
Yes.
Beyond this computer is a screen, and on that screen is something that I hope will be a book, which tackles what did our enemies do with race in the period since the Second World War, and to what extent did we get captured by an approach to race which suited them down to the ground and not us, right? I have a book, and it may be that I should just leave that to one side, but it's got so bad, my young brother, that there are bright people, good historians, who are now able and willing to say that the very use of the word race is an indication of racism.
Yes.
It's that bad, right? And it's serious, right? I have in mind two sisters from the States. I have their book on my shelf, and I know one of the sisters personally. She was actually married to Winston James, who's my friend. And their book on race says that, right? So something very serious which we have to understand happened with race, and that's what's. Thank you for reminding me that declaration says that, because I really didn't remember. So I just now incorporate it into the work that I'm doing. But that's what that signifies. And the other thing that was happening on our continent is that in the decades after the war, capitalism was so discredited and socialism so, I don't know, bigged up, that all kinds of reactionaries, including Senghor and people like that, have books entitled African Socialism. And the brother in Zambia declared at one stage for Marxism Leninism. So and it wasn't a monster or anything, but humanist. So it says something about what was happening ideologically in.
Sorry, that's Kenneth Cowan that you're referring to.
Yes, Cowan, I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Who
incidentally only passed away a couple of years ago.
Yeah, he lived a long time. So the point I'm making is, it's a kind of roundabout way, is that when we look back at the events like the six-pack, and even perhaps the seven-pack, but certainly the six-pack, how we analyze it, a lot depends on what was happening in the world round class. The fact that the West looked momentarily vulnerable, even as it was being brutally self-interested in all kinds of places, Central America, South America, Africa, all of the dictators were its agents, right? And how we understand that moment matters. So some of the anti-race stuff, right, that offends you and me, you can only understand that if you go back to how imperialism captured the minds of whites and some black on an anti-race program which served their interest and not ours. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that we have to understand is why it was that even as capitalism, imperialism was managing to do what it was doing in Central America and in parts of Africa and defending South Africa, that nevertheless socialism had the political intellectual fashionability that persuaded reactionaries to put socialism in their title and of their work. So it's a moment that we have to understand with more nuance. Your term.
Yes. No, it's very necessary.
And we do. Yeah.
It's very necessary. So for example, you get to understand because the current propaganda is, and it's a growing and a developing propaganda, that the poverty in Africa today can be attributed to the socialism of post-colonial, quote unquote, African leaders, is the actual narrative. Yeah, that is the dominant narrative now. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's why I started there. It's not.
No, I know. Yeah, of course not true.
Where are the African countries that embrace socialism and ruin their economy as a result of it? Which ones do you have in mind?
Which ones were they? Right? You know what I'm saying? Now, the ridiculousness of it begins and with the fact that you mentioned Senghor, Leopold Senghor, who was the independence leader within Senegal, has all kinds of contradictions, and you're right, did proclaim some kind of socialism, but then accepts the French independence package, which is basically a continuation of colonialism. So how one can conclude that Senghor was a socialist when his economy was run by colonizers is ridiculous. It doesn't even make sense, right? Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. And one doesn't, and that identifying that doesn't require an agreement or even a disagreement with socialism. It's just manifestly impossible, right? For that to have been the case.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So we who are thinking and talking and writing about these things have to bring those absurdities to attention, and we have to put them in our writing and in our speaking.
Absolutely, and that's why we're here, brothers and sisters, on gotkushTV, soon to be known as King Runga Media. You know, it's about the propaganda on behalf of our people. I'm going to go to some questions from the chat, and then we're going to wrap up. Chikezi, and this was a question I was going to ask, but I read this question and I thought, let me just add to the brother's question. To enable successful Pan-Africanism, is it not necessary to implement some form of African spirituality as its foundation, as power corrupts? And what African spirituality? Well, he's asking which African spirituality. I would argue that we don't need to make a decision there. But this comes to another issue, Olusesu, that relates to the previous question I asked in terms of how revolutionary Pan-Africanism is often formally defined. And one of the criticisms is that there is a very, in fact, another commenter has actually made this point. There's a lack of an appreciation, even among many Pan-Africanists sometimes, of African epistemologies, African knowledge centers, African knowledge bases as a foundation for developing new knowledge, new systems, new social and economic structure, organization, and so on and so forth. So essentially the brother is asking, do we not need an African cultural foundation for revolutionary Pan-Africanism to be functional and to be successful and to work?
Well, yes, and the sensible that none of the best value heroes aren't, 100% unproblematic. But
Yes.
Fanon was an explorer of African culture. Walter Rodney was an explorer of African culture history. Nkrumah, in his way, was I am, you are, and so and so we have to put beside that the body of unobjectionable and sometimes positively embraceable body of work that's being done by all kinds of people who are maybe less, class political than say I am, but they're doing important cultural and spiritual work, which is part of the package that I respect and use. And so my revolutionary Pan-Africanism takes my Kemet seriously and tries to understand it, and always did from the 70s, 60s, whatever, long time ago. Right. And so I'm not personally hot on, in inverted commas, spirituality, but I respect what the other people who are more in that direction than me are doing. Your father, etc. So I don't have a problem, and I don't see why anybody who's wanting to take revolutionary Pan-Africanism seriously don't believe that African culture, including the best concepts of African spirituality, are part of the package, if you will, that is revolutionary Pan-Africanism. I say regularly that the Haitian Revolution succeeded, not just militarily, or that if it succeeded just militarily, the conception of what was military was massively African cultural, and that when you take the Maroons who were part, the Haitian Maroons who were part of that revolution, put into the package, and what the fact that so many of the participants were freshly from continental Africa, that's a African cultural as well as African military victory. And it's at the center of revolutionary Pan-African achievement and conceptualization. So those who don't see that, and they should, and if they want to add extra cultural, specifically strictly, or extra spiritual, strictly, whatever dimension to that, let them do it. But they mustn't believe that somehow this is moving away from revolutionary Pan-Africanism. It's about using the best of what we have available, and that's cultural, spiritual, military, and all of the other things to liberate and unify ourselves.
I was challenged on some of this the other day, in the sense of my own appreciation for our revolutionary ancestors who, to varying different degrees, claimed, various different degrees of Marxism and or socialism. And whether or not I agree or disagree with them entirely in their entirety, one of the points that I did make, however, for those of us who see the African cultural orientation as essential to the revolutionary process, we have to also appreciate the work that those ancestors who we might critique for their Marxism did along the lines of that project. Yeah. And so I mentioned Nkrumah, for example, in like Conscientism, a book that people find very difficult to read, but he's attempting something here, yeah, that we can appreciate. I personally believe that Amilcar Cabral was probably of that generation of leaders, like, you know, revolutionary leaders was probably the most advanced in this regard. And I also believe that Cabral and those of us who follow him gave Marx way too much credit for what he produced.
Okay.
Right? You know what I'm saying? But the problem is that we can't dismiss Cabral's, because Cabral had a very definitive cultural analysis, a revolutionary one.
Yes, of course he did.
That we can't dismiss because of his affinity with Marx and socialism. That as an African cultural revolutionary culture nationalist, there is work in Cabral for me to appreciate and extend and even correct, as and where the case might be. And I think the issue is that oftentimes in our Pan-African knowledge production, African epistemologies often don't take enough of the center stage, right? Just what I'm saying. Yes. So we can conceptualize African culture in terms of a cultural expression, yeah, in terms of the aspect of the movement that expresses the goals of the movement in music and art and them kind of things there. But when it comes to developing economic theory and structure, we tend not to see, or there's not enough African knowledge production that is on the basis of indigenous systems and the development and evolution of indigenous systems, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does make sense. So let me say one or two things in response. I take Marxism seriously, and I think that we're in danger of giving Marxism too much credit. And the reason we're in danger of giving Marxism too much credit is that it's in a crisis. I mean,
right.
Early in my talk, I said something about what Marx did with the notion praxis. And if praxis is central to Karl Marx, what it effectively asserts is that theory not validated by practice is no theory at all. That leaves Marxism in the deepest of trouble, because it's failing a fundamental way at the level of practice, even though the analysis of the world has more to recommend it than almost you can get from almost anywhere else if you're just looking at social science or socio-history. So despite being my shelf over is full of stuff, but I read it and take it seriously. But we must stop being terrorized by Marxism, because it's in trouble. Marx in 1848, was talking about the arrival of the European working class as the grave diggers of history. Right? Capitalism has dug their grave. Right? There's only one place, Russia, in which they managed successfully to have a revolution in circumstances where the state had fallen apart before the revolution was successful. So Marxism, despite the strength of what it has to say about class, don't have any big claims that dwarf the claims, or that are not the same kind of crisis as revolutionary Pan-Africanism is in, when you think of the state that Africa is in, and whether we have the machinery and to get rid of neoliberalism and so on. So our approach to the world, and let me just say one other thing. the American working class, right? When Hillary Clinton used the expression deplorables, right? And she said half, the American working class she was talking about, half of the Trump supporters are deplorables, racist, sexist, whatever, whatever, right? And the other half, and she specifies this too, they are defeated, fearful, etc., etc. People should look up what Hillary Clinton said and read it. That's a crisis that the white working class is in. And in the crisis that they are, I don't know if you were watching the man who Trump has chosen as his vice chair.
Yes,
But his
Mm.
speech was a critique of capitalism, of American capitalism.
Sorry, not to interrupt you, but similar can be said of the Reform Party's manifesto, or well, not manifesto. They didn't call it a manifesto, but I don't know how much you paid attention to Nigel Farage and Reform's manifesto in the UK election. It's a similar dynamic.
I didn't read that particular document, but what we're seeing is the fate of the people that old Carl, whose analysis was very good, said we're going to be digging the grave, right? And they are so away from their class interest that capitalism can sell them the rubbish that Trump and JD, what name? Trump, Vance and Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage can sell. And it gets so awful that the Labour Party in the UK doesn't even have the capacity to analyze the benefits that come from Britain being in the European Union, and can be persuaded by Johnson and Farage that the state that they're in is nothing to do with the economic crisis that finance capital caused, and the way in which, you know, the capitalist parties made them pay for it, but I tell them that it's something to do with Brexit and something to do with Europe and that. Right? So Pan-Africanists, Africans, people who have a perspective on, who want to liberate ourselves as Africans, don't have to cower in the face of Marxism.
Right.
And don't have to believe that class theory out there is something better than we can and have conceived. And we don't have to not understand what a black man like Stuart Hall, like Cabral, like Nkrumah, like, there's a whole list of them, have actually added to Marxism. Right? And insofar as Marxism has any value now, it's not because of what Karl Marx said, although that has value, it's because of what we, including Rodney and me in my smallest way, and Ricky Cambridge and Stuart Hall and them have put into Marxism.
Right.
Which enables it to deal with race and to deal with gender and so on and so forth.
And all these things.
Who give that to Marxism.
I humbly submit to you. I was watching because I was considering releasing it the other day, and I might still do. But you know the debate that we held on Garveyism versus Marxism. I was thinking to release it.
That's an embarrassment. Oh,
I wouldn't say that.
Your father and then wiped the floor with us. We didn't do actually Marxism could be better defended than Tongagar and I did on that
day. Okay, maybe so. Maybe so. Because I was gonna put it out just as a preliminary kind of. I wasn't gonna put it the whole thing, just the main arguments. Yeah. As a preliminary insight into those debates, because people don't know that those debates exist. But this idea, like, I humbly submit to you that a part of the problem, coming back to my statement about knowledge production and intellectual production, that so much of our intellectual production is a contribution towards Marxism, right? just what I'm saying. It's defined in such terms. And so those schools of thoughts get the credit for what we produce because we define it in those terms, right? We define it as what we do with Marx and adding to Marxism rather than adding to our own indigenous epistemologies. From which, and if we listen to even nationalists like Papa Garvey and even Amos Wilson, so that we can learn from other people but Africanize the knowledge, right? So what we learn from them adds to our own rather than what we develop as to fit them thing, if that makes sense.
I think you do. I think you do have a point there, because objectively that is what is happening. But so and the other thing that I would add is to repeat that the prestige that Marxism has in terms of what Marx said about praxis is now undeserved.
Right. I understand what you're saying. The other day, I used the term working idealism coming out of Mama Amy Jakes Garvey to describe when I was dealing with scientific Garveyism, and it's a similar thing because we're extracting the theory from the practice, because the theory wasn't always written down in definitive terms. You have to extract the theory from the practice. So I get your point, Elder Cecil. So let's move forward. I'm going to try and move.
Let me just say one little thing. I noticed the reference to idealism, and it's kind of as tainted and as European as Marxism, and
I take your point.
The whole Marxist approach to.
But no, I know where you're coming from. All I will do is emphasize the word that precedes it, which is working.
I hear you. Let the work continue, therefore.
Right, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. You know what I mean? All right. So but I take your point, and one of the things that is interesting to me is that the idealist that the Marxists were trying to challenge actually still exists. There's a whole idealist socialist critique of what is referred to as scientific socialism, coming out of Marx, right? So that's interesting to study. Papa Garvey say hear all, but I tend only to that which concerns you. So it's important for us to be cognizant of these.
Did I send you Winston James's very good article on Garvey and Lenin?
Yes, you did. Much of the information I was cognizant of, but like Tony Martin writes on a lot of it, as does Rupert Lewis. And others, So but he did highlight some things that I wasn't aware of as well. So give thanks for that. I'm gonna move quickly through these questions. People wait till the last minute to send in all the questions on them. After I've been asking for it for how long. So right. So and a few of them we probably can't answer today. But Brother Kwame is asking, and I'm not sure exactly what he's referring to here, but he says, do you really think in your hand on heart that Africans are poor? In my opinion, misled. So I think he's saying that Africans are not poor, we're just misled. I'm not.
Of course, Africans are not poor. That big statement about Africa being the richest continent on the world is objectively true. So the problem is that capitalism, using neocolonialism, has taken hold of those resources, the gold, the diamonds, the platinum, whatever. All of it not owned by us. It's in Africa, but it's being extracted and so on. So if that stuff isn't converted into products in Africa, into jobs in Africa, into return ownership by Africans, of course Africans are poor. But it's a function of the capitalist maldevelopment and capitalist mal-ownership of our resources. and the failure of neocolonialism in the hands of capitalism to address what Africa needs, which is a unified home base, proper approaches to manufacturing production, and some of it is there. That's what Dangote is, and so on. So it is not impossible, but one of the difficulties is precisely the fact that there's 50 Africas rather than one. And
let me probe your Dangote point for a second, Elder Cecil, though, because it might be somewhat problematic. Dangote in and of himself is not a revolutionary force and won't be anytime soon. Yeah.
No, I'm not saying that he is.
No, I know you're not. That's why I'm asking the question to clarify this thing, because somebody might take this and cause mischief with it. Yeah. Because we have to understand that the context in which Dangote now operates in is a thoroughly neo-colonial one, and his wealth is a product of that neo-colonial system and is designed to maintain it. So I understand the point that you're making is that within a revolutionary context, we can use a Dangote, rather than Dangote is himself a model for success and development on the African continent. Is that correct?
Yes, I think I like that, but right now, I wouldn't want to kick down or hang every Dangote. Or
no. But Dangote himself, let's be clear about this. Dangote's business is oil. Yes. Right. He's in the oil business, and the oil in Nigeria is still dominated by Chevron, BP, Shell, and ExxonMobil. Yeah. Right. So Dangote is a client. Yeah. we have to make this clear. If now run things, know about the place. Yeah.
I agree with that. My understanding of is that his business isn't only oil.
No. Yeah.
And it may not even be mainly oil, but oil is a big part of it. So, and yes, the neocolonial context is the context in which it has been that wealth has been made. So yeah, I'm not arguing that is the model for the way forward.
But delve into it a bit, Elder Cecil, in the sense of and by the way, just to say, you're right. I think his biggest thing is cement. Yeah. His biggest thing is cement, and then he goes into oil, and I think there's even salt in there as well, or something like that, right? But just delve into what you're saying here, though, in terms of you wouldn't necessarily, hang draw and quarter the Dangote them. Like, what are you saying in terms of a revolutionary development and what we do with the Dangotes of this world?
Well, we're a long way from being able to do anything with them apart from live with them and hope they don't kill us, because the first time we move against them, they're likely to get us before we get them. And to go back to 74 and the six-pack.
Yes.
Those declarations, however welcome, and even though the criticism of the kind that you make of them and others, the truth of the matter is that that thing ushered into a neocolonial Africa, and nothing specifically happened on continental Africa or in the Caribbean in any even indirect way out of what happened at Dar in 74, and the same applies after the 7th, when the only thing that happened is that a brother got appointed and dashed around Africa and wrote and mobilized, but next to nothing, right? And something else happened. A very bright sister who I know and like and respect actually wrote a paper called Pan-Afrikanism, and the kind of feminist point was that all Pan-Africanism now was
Man, them
male
pontificating.
chauvinist men dominating the African political landscape. I mean, the problem with that is that it mixes up neocolonialism and Pan-Africanism. But yeah, so things are not easy, and you know, we're in nowhere like the position that the Chinese Communist Party was in the 40s, in the 40s and 50s, when they could make decisions about what to do with Chinese capital. Yeah.
Okay, so it's power acquisition that we have to get in order to know what to do with them. I get what you're saying.
Yes.
By the way, so for a good analysis on the 7th Pan African Congress, Hakim Adi's book, Pan Africanism: A History, actually does quite a good rundown of what happened, and what happened in the UK in particular. He does quite a good rundown of how things were organized and who was involved and so on and so forth. So anybody looking for further research on that, feel free to check out that book. What's it called? Let me say no. Right, moving quickly. Midab Gumaisi Dilda is a Somali Pan-African song I know. Really great song. Strong proclamations of blackness, which is interesting. I know why you're laughing.
If you have it in any transmissible way, send it to me so we can listen to it now, man.
Yes. I'll send you another one as well. There's another song called
Hulu
Doi. That I know of. It's a powerful song, big tune. It's just So yeah, I'm gonna look. I'm not sure if I come across this one, but I'll look for it, and if I find it, I'll send it to you, other Cecil. And yeah, so give thanks to Trigger Happy Nessa. Sister Joseph asked, "How is racism different from other philosophies?"
I don't understand the question.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. All right, so if you can clarify, Sister Joseph, and maybe we might have to come to an answer on another session.
Because it looks as if the sister who's asking the question is saying that what we're saying is racist.
Right.
On the face of the question. And I hope she's not saying that, because it'd be very distressing for me, and I would be distressed about the position that she was in if she'd arrived at that
understood
position.
Understood.
Yeah. I mean,
understood.
Yeah. So yeah.
Shout out to Meloman.
Tell her to feel free to clarify
the thing. Yeah, please. I'm not sure we can answer this today in the Meloman. I certainly don't know about it. But he said, heard about the LGBTQ furies that have hacked NATO, Israel, and the Heritage Foundation. Downloading the leaks could make you a target, though. I don't know about this situation, so I can't speak to it at all.
No,
yeah, I can't speak to it at all.
Nor can I.
And then Sister Joseph's asked, this is the final one. Why is conscientism a revolutionary document, and why is Marxism a Eurocentric philosophy?
All right, those are good questions. On conscientism, I have to say that I've never been. It's not a book by Nkrumah that I'm impressed by or particularly interested in. That's just my own personal response. I know some European philosophy, and I think that book appeared to me less effectively African philosophy than relatively poor European philosophy. To be honest, that's right. But I don't know if I ever read it properly. But when it came out, I did look at it, and that kind of was my attitude. I may have been wrong, so I probably need to read it properly. So that's the first part of that, and I don't believe that Marxism is in and of itself Eurocentrism, but it does come out of Europe. Marx says some individual racist things. Marx has some attitudes to Asia, particularly India, inside of it, that is inescapably racist, or you have very great difficulty arguing that it isn't racist. But the perspective on imperialism and capitalism imperialism, on the racism of that setup, Marx had a very good understanding of and a brilliant analysis of, and it's been only improved upon by the people who have written further from a Marxist perspective. And so I remain interested in Marxism, but I'm not terrorized by it, and don't feel the need to kowtow to any position just because it claims to be Marxist. And I argue with all kinds of people. There are some people, for example, who are attempting to capture Walter Rodney's work for a particular Marxist tendency, which turns out to be Eurocentric.
You're not talking about Verso books?
No. They publish by Verso, but they're not Verso in themselves. The main book of that kind, in my view, is the work of a man called Leo Zelig, who has a book called Walter Rodney, A Revolutionary for Our Time, and he edits a journal, and I have difficulty with the stuff on Rodney that they put out. I haven't particularly studied that particular book, the title of which I just just mentioned, but their position is problematic. In their journal, I think it's called the Review of African Marxist Review or something, I have an article which is a response to I know the young man, and he's bright and he's got better on Walters as he's come along, but the thing
go on.
Thing that they published by him on Walter was deplorably bad.
I think I remember this. I think I've read your response and his article. I think it was a few years ago. Yeah, I think I recall this.
Not all that long. It's a bit more than 4 years ago. Yeah.
Yes. I remember. I will say just to say that for people that refer to Marxism as Eurocentric, not necessarily, although this would be included because of his racism. Wherever that racism was extended, it's mostly because why Marxism is referred to as Eurocentric is because of the analysis and the people that he used and the cultures that he used to form the basis of his analysis was Europe. And to the extent that those who, whether Marx himself did this or not, the Marxist tradition attempts to universalize his analysis, and so the resistance to that is that we cannot assume that what Marx identifies in Europe is applicable in every sense to Asia, to indigenous America, to Africa. And so the Eurocentrism in it is on that basis more than it is. I would argue more than it is racism.
But that approach is a false approach to Marxism. The one thing that you do not do with Marxism, if you're going to use it in relation to India, is just say that all we're looking for here is how India reproduced Europe in class terms. I mean that is completely idiotic. So that's not how and a serious Indian Marxist would approach India using Marx, right? So,
and there are a few serious Indian Marxists out there, brothers and sisters.
There are indeed, yes.
They're good to listen to as well. When you want to, if you want to understand the economic development of India, you can get some good. You can learn some good things.
The economic maldevelopment of India, yes.
Of India, yeah. my last question to you, Elder Cecil, because I know we got to wrap up here, is on
one of them,
mentioned...
and sorry, one of them, and he's not a Marxist. He's just seriously scholarly. Somebody called SHI, and then his surname is THAR.
Oh, Shashi Tharoor.
Yes.
Yeah, Shashi Tharoor.
Glorious Empire.
He's very far from a Marxist, but excellent on the history. Yeah, excellent on the history.
Yes.
Yeah,
and there are other people. There's a Chinese Trinidadian who wrote a book on indenture. What was his name? Very good. He has we published something. He did an essay on that novelist who has anyway. What was his name? And his book on the connection between the British and India and getting labor out of India to all of the places, and a whole heap more than we imagine of the empire, the labor force is a good, very sound book.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the reasons why Shashi is good to read.
His name is Walton Lookley.
Walton Lookley. Okay, all right.
Yes, and we have something by him in the Black Liberator when we used to call him Wally Lookley.
Okay.
Serious, very
so
serious.
Look like, brothers. This is spell look as in to look, and then lie, L-A-I. Yeah, Walton Lookley. Yeah. But I was gonna say that one of the benefits of reading Shashi Tharoor is that he's not remotely revolutionary. He's just trying to mount a defense of India as a and the impact of Britain on India. There's no revolutionary pretensions, inclinations, or nothing. Right? It's just what I mean.
It's absolutely true.
Right.
Yeah.
What I mean.
To see how wicked the British were in relation to India or Africa. If you're an honest historian, you don't have to be a revolutionary.
Right, you don't have to be revolutionary.
It's astonishing. It's just astonishing how wicked they were.
Right, we wicked they were. And the more I mature as an activist and an organizer, like the last decade of my life, like studying things like what the British did in India is just essential. You just have to know what the British did in India. It's very important as far because of the role that India played in the British Empire. It's just essential that as African people we understand what the British did in India.
And there's another reason. We're the only ones that enslavement happened to, and we think that's the only thing that we have to understand. It's not true. We have to understand the modern world.
Yes, absolutely.
Because when these people sailed out of their little corner of the world with all the viciousness they carried with them, we weren't the only victims. And what they did to others, it matters that we understand it.
Entirely important. Elder Cecil, I want to wrap up, but I want to ask you this question about foreign capital. In neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism, and Nkrumah makes the point that the fight against neocolonialism is not necessarily about disqualifying, in words, the what's it called, foreign capital from African nations, but it's about negating the impact of that foreign capital to exploit. And he makes the same argument in relation to the communist world and so on and so forth. But you made the point today about foreign capital. And it's an essential point because more and more, like the drive for Africa to be clients of foreign capital is in overdrive at the moment. I would argue, and so not that we don't understand what Nkrumah was saying, but should it be a consideration for us to really, reject foreign capital? Is that important as far as developing a revolutionary Pan-African praxis in this day and age? What should our relationship be with foreign capital?
Okay, I mean, I think that Walter Rodney's insight on the nature of direct foreign capitalist investment is, I hold, as a fundamental part of my approach to that matter. So what is happening when foreign capital, I mean, European foreign capital comes, the Chinese may do it differently, is that they say they invest, and you can see a figure of what they've invested. And then if you look, they get it back. They get it back very quickly, and they end up owning absolutely everything. So foreign direct capital investment is a mechanism for transfer of our resources to their hands for nothing, because the investment gets paid for out of our resources. Right? So it's literally for nothing. Literally nothing. If that is true, and it undoubtedly is, go and look at the figures, what has happened in Ghana. Sorry, not Ghana, Guyana, over oil.
Over the oil.
Yeah, and how it's being paid for. So if that is so, then I'm not sure where the capital that's required for investment might come from.
Right.
So I don't have the answer to that, right? But
the answer is China and Russia.
No, not straight off like that, and not because no China and no Russia.
Right.
There are things that are happening in the world. What are the Arabs doing with their money? Right? They are not usurers, so not even necessarily setting out to make money, but they have trillions and trillions which are being wasted on idiotic investments in the West.
Right.
And I would be for looking at that source and talking to Arabs. Now, it would have to be properly planned and so on. And this is not revolutionary, incidentally, but it's just finding a way to connect economic development to resources that don't come on the basis that they come presently from London or Paris or New York. Right. And there are piles of resources in other places. Norway has a tower of money out of its oil that's just sitting there, and that could be with proper agreements used in a very different way from the way in which it's presently sitting, and in effect not being used at all. So I would like to be thinking about that kind of thing before we say Russia and China.
Yes.
The Chinese are not benevolent. Take Jamaica. I've been there recently. My understanding of it is that nothing no wrong with that. They come to build roads. They're toll roads. The way toll roads get paid for is that the builder get the toll money, and that's how the capital gets refunded. If the toll, it turns out to be the case that the toll fees are a bit expensive in Jamaica, so people are using the old roads rather than the toll roads. So they just need to stretch it out a little bit longer, and they can get their money back. How does it come to be the case that people who come to build toll roads, which get paid for in the way that I just suggested, get land?
Yes.
I mean, why had the Jamaican government, given the Chinese all of the land that they have given them? Right? It's unrelated to the roads. So what did we get in exchange for that. And I haven't seen any answer to that. Maybe I haven't asked it properly or haven't looked carefully, but there's a problem there. And there are problems, and again, not 100% investigated, but Chinese money in Zambia. There's stuff there about what of Zambia has been taken over by China because of defaults and whatever. So some very strange agreements. Right? Our neocolonial classes, I mean, they're very well educated, but there's a level of stupidity that is past understanding. So if we shift momentarily, how did it come to be the case that in the Caribbean and most of Africa, where a little bit of research would have told you that COVID is not coming in your way because there are no direct flights from China, which is the way the way COVID came to the places that came to many. Southern Europe, South Africa, the exception, North America, Brazil, and so on, right? Those are the places. Why in God's name would African governments agree to vaccinate a healthy populations with a vaccine that's untested and that on the face of it is a dangerous, deadly technology which is only being used because they've panicked their own people into believing that this is the way to protect them from COVID. And yet it happened, and Jamaica they're even complaining about being unable to get COVID vaccine. When the society never needed it. So our neocolonial leaders, they don't read. Right? How does it come to be the case that in Jamaica, Depo-Provera is still on offer to women when from the 70s we've known that it's not good for women, right? So and those are the people who are signing the agreements with China. And the Chinese come and dig down the whole mountain and gone. Or come and say you haven't paid for whatever and take possession of it because they've signed up to that in the agreement. So even if you're not a revolutionary, I mean, I think you should be a little bit sensible in relation to what your duties are.
I take your point. I think then that leads to the obvious kind of comparison between the deals that China is making with us in our weak state as nations and the deals that China would not make itself. I think then it's easy to come to the conclusion that what's missing as far as we are concerned is a strong state sector. In other words, foreign investment and foreign involvement in Chinese economy is heavily regulated by the government, you know, based upon the national goals of the government. So is that the conclusion that we should come to based upon your analysis there, that we lack a strong state sector, and China is able to take advantage of that?
It's not a strong state sector. It's the fact that of the fundamental error of the 1963 decision to go with what Europe set up at the Congress of Berlin as the governance structures of Africa. It makes there is no way in which for Africa it makes sense. None. Right? I'm still waiting. I mean, I hear the odd person, usually a supporter of Nyerere, who said
Yes.
that Nyerire's argument was that we weren't ready or couldn't manage,
Yes.
you know, to build and make an integrated state. Well, fail trying, no man.
No, I hear you. To be fair, Nyerere did come to say that Nkrumah was correct.
Yes, I know,
You know,
but so that is a fundamental part of where we are, and the objective of unity and liberation actually go together. As my title suggested, and as I hope I was arguing here and everywhere else that I get the opportunity.
All right. Elder Cecil, give thanks. You've been a fountain of wisdom and insight as always, and you know, so we appreciate you every time you come through, as do our viewers. Can we get some? Sorry, go ahead.
Let me congratulate you on the depth of your reading and investigation of the various. No, I'm serious about the issues, because you knew about Botswana and so on and so forth and so on. So I mean, what this means is that we all have a duty to work at understanding our world and understanding what we have to know and do to defend Africa.
Well, brothers and sisters, you only have to look behind Elder Cecil to know what a compliment it is when Elder Cecil compliments you on your reading. So we received that compliment, with most humility, Elder Cecil. So we give thanks for that. But let's give Elder Cecil some black power fist and some red, black, green in the chat if you're appreciating the analysis and the information. And no doubt Elder Cecil will be back whenever he says he wants to come back and has a title, he'll be here, brothers and sisters. So do stay tuned for more from Elder Cecil in the coming months. And want to thank you all for tuning in. We want to thank you all for listening in. We want to thank you for commenting. We want to give thanks to all those who ask questions, and all those who are sending in their black power fists right about now. We give thanks for you all, brothers and sisters, and we hope that you've learned something from today's reasoning. History is best qualified to reward all research, and so Elder Cecil has given us a analysis through which we can understand the world, as he puts it, and what analysis such as we received from Fred Swanika in today's presentation is designed to really facilitate our misunderstanding of the world. And that video came about a decade ago in the height of the Africa Rising narrative, where they were telling us that Africa is some of the fastest growing economies on the planet and so on, right? And all of that was to distract us from a proper appreciation of our revolutionary history and our revolutionary leaders and the problems that they were trying to solve, and to render those problems now no longer viable, relevant. They're outdated. That kind of psychology, right? And so we have to recognize how fundamentally relevant that analysis is. And Elder Cecil has provided us with a framework, for understanding how relevant, that analysis is, brothers and sisters. So we want to appreciate Elder Cecil. I'm not going to ask you for no closing words, Elder Cecil, because I know you don't like the closing words business.
No, I don't like closing words.
Yes. So
opening ones are better.
Right, you know what I mean? So, so let's go ahead and say give thanks.
Good to see you, my brother. Say hi to your father. Say hi to your father and mother for me. Lovely people.
I shall do. I shall do. And if them now watch, them I go watch it back. So they'll hear it themselves.
Don't force them.
I shall not. Brothers and sisters, with that we say 10 down one, and be thankful unto the Mother, Father, creative life force of the universe. We give praises unto our great ancestors. Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodi, African power and African liberation for all African people. Ashe.
Black people, we've got to fight. Jean Petro, you see us. Oguo, we've got to fight. let's go fight. Oh, black people, we've got to fight. Zumbi, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, black people, we've got to fight. Yes, Santa, why you see us? Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, black people, we've got to fight. Bookman, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh,
we have to have the courage to construct our own reality. And that's what Garvey was talking about. Because he said he looked around, he didn't see what he thought should be there, and so what did he do? He didn't get depressed about it. He didn't get defeated about it. He said, I'm gonna build the government that we need to have. Ooh, where do you get that kind of boldness from? So we gotta go all the way back to Garvey, who said he would come again. He said he would be here with us, no matter how long it took. And I'm telling you that the way he comes back is in our work. Not honoring him in words, pomp and all of that stuff, but honoring him through doing what he did. How many of us have the courage to do that? The man took on the world for us and in our name. And then we come to Sodai. And in this presentation of the paradigm, I'm going to make this like what it is we want to reach. So Sodai is translated clear word in Dogana language. And I use it to mean that here we gain understanding. This is sight with understanding. And it is seeing beyond what just we think we see with this physical thing. It's seeing beyond that. And so we gain vision, because that's what vision is. With vision, you've got to be able to use the imagination informed by the African spirit. And Brother Amos, who I work very closely with, was a good friend of mine. He taught me, and he would talk about imagination. Image a nation. Do you see? But that's got to be part of vision. To be a visionary, you got to see beyond this box here. You got to see beyond the ma'afa. You got to see what is it that our people rightfully should have, and that's what Garvey did. Garvey had a vision.